everybody. Call this meeting to order. This is the fourth meeting of the task force for reviewing the connectivity and technology needs of precision agriculture in the United States. I want to welcome everybody to this meeting. Again, this meeting is being broadcast live on www.fcc.gov/live. So for the participants here, you can follow along. Rather than do a roll call, since this is on a Microsoft Teams, I have the list of everybody, and just want to let everybody know that we are all present, but we're waiting for Jeff Pettit to join. So everyone in the task force is present, but we're waiting for Jeff Pettit to join, so we will look for him. So that's the one person so far. With that, I think that is all the quick business. I will turn it over to Teddy Bekele, the task force chair, for some opening remarks, and Teddy will kind of go over the structure of the meeting today and the agenda. Teddy?
Great, thank you, Jesse. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, task force members and folks from the FCC as well as the USDA. Glad to have this meeting. It's our fourth meeting, but it is virtual. It's been an unusual year, as we talked about many times before. Being a technologist, there are several meetings that I think could be done virtually, but this was one that I really would have liked to have it in person. I think going over the reports, the recommendations, the discussions, usually those things are more robust when you're face to face, but considering the circumstances and where we are, we'll make do, and hopefully we'll have a great morning this way. One of the things I want to start out with was just a big thank you to the chairs, vice chairs, and the working groups. A lot of work has gone into over the last couple of months into providing these reports. A lot of thought has gone into the recommendations themselves. I spent quite a bit of time in the last month reviewing these reports into detail, and I can say there's a lot of richness there. And I do appreciate all the hard work people have put into this and getting us to this point. A little bit of kind of what we will do today from an agenda perspective. It's pretty straightforward. After these opening remarks, what we'll do is we'll get into the discussions of the specific working groups. So each working group will have about 90 minutes. And then we'll have 90 minutes for each one. So after the first two, at this moment in time, we're set to have lunch. That will be at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. If we go a little bit faster, we might try to squeeze in the third one in, but I'm not really sure how that will go, and we'll just monitor it as we go as the day progresses. I will, in the middle of that, try to have a break between the first working group report and the second one. Just so that would have a 10 to 15 minute break in there. And hopefully, again, we'll see how the time progresses and use it that way. And then, after the lunch, we'll do the third working group. And then the last one, there's not a report for that working group, but we will have Jeff Pettit just give us an update on the discussions that have happened in the working group. I know they've also teamed up with some others here and give us an update on that one and potentially give us a little bit of an update on the next steps. Doing a quick deep dive into sort of the 90 minutes for each report. I sent a note out to the chairs last night, but just to kind of give everyone a little bit of a structure on how we're going to do this. We'll have the chair open up their 90 minutes with just giving us a little bit of overview of the charge for the group and also how the team tackled the work. We will then have the chair succinctly walk through the sections of the document at a high level. I believe at this point we've all had a chance to read the reports, so we don't need to walk through the document in extreme detail, but just a little bit of a thought on how it was structured and the thinking behind it. And then the meat of it really is going to be in the recommendations. And I know depending on the document, some are at the end of the document, others are in the middle. I'll let the chair handle kind of how they want to structure those conversations, but really to have a review of each recommendation. And that's at the point in time where once the chair of the working group has given the update on the recommendation, I would expect some discussion from the team here, maybe some questions, maybe some comments, and then we'll see if the recommendation is good as it stands or if some edits need to be made to it. Once we've gone through all the recommendations in the document, then what we'll do is vote on the report and the recommendations, right? So either we will vote on it as in, hey, there's some edits that need to be made, but these will be the edits, and then the report as a whole is good as it stands, and together we will vote on that one way or the other. Once the voting is done, I think that will be the end of the session for that working group, and then we will take the break and move on to the next one after that. The last thing I'll say is this is, again, we have 2 years to do this, right? So this is the sort of the midterm report in a way for us. So some of these things are still preliminary. If you read a lot of the documents, there's still some recommendations that are made for others working groups to look into some of the issues. So, and that's exactly where we want to be right now. And so there may be some things that move out of one report, move to another one, and things of that nature. And that's totally acceptable at this moment in time. This is almost like, we've gone through 1 year, we sort of formulated some thoughts, and we're submitting them at this moment in time. So it's not by any means our final one. So there's still things could be moving. And then obviously we will spend the majority of, next year finalizing it and really tightening this down among the groups, and we're also making sure that we have synergy across them, and that the recommendations kind of build upon each other. So I'm excited to see that come together. But like I said, I really do want to thank the teams and the chairs and the vice chairs for getting us to this point. There's some robust information there, and I really do look forward to the rest of the day and the conversations we'll be having. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Catherine for a few remarks.
Thanks, Teddy. I am not going to add a whole lot of substance there because I think you covered it all wonderfully. I'm just going to add that I'm really excited about this meeting because I know firsthand from working with the connectivity group that there's been a lot of work that has gotten into these reports. And I think that the robust discussion that I look forward to having is going to be very helpful and puts us on a good path to coming up with some really great recommendations next year. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Teddy, so we can get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. Just a quick check. Jesse, did we have Jeff join the meeting? Or, yep, I feel like he's in. Oh.
Yep.
Yes.
I'm here.
Awesome. Good morning. Good to have you. All right. So with that, we'll start with the first working group, which is the data mapping working group. So Dr. Adeline, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the mapping working group. I hope we don't get paid by the number of pages in our report. I shorted our working group by that. I tend to work as succinctly as possible, so you can see there's not a lot of pages to it, but the data is in the box folder, and there's a lot of files there to do that. I will tell you, as an academic, I think about this task in this particular way. We collect data, we inform ourselves, and we create new knowledge. And I hope our recommendations work towards new knowledge. Data by itself is not worth much. Information in itself does not create change. It's creating new knowledge, and that's what we're attempting. With that said, let me talk quickly about the charge. So 1251B3AI says that we need to identify and measure current gaps in availability of broadband internet as it relates to agricultural lands. The second charge is recommend specific steps that the commission should take to attain reliable and standardized data measurements of availability of broadband internet access. And I think the third one, recommends specific steps that the commission should consider to ensure that the expertise of the secretary and available farm data are reflected in future programs. So with that said, I'm going to pull up a Word document. Okay. That of course is the wrong one. Okay. I'm going to go to Plan B since I can't seem to get it popped up. And it's to walk through the document. Essentially, the first page where we walk through what we've learned from all the data we collected. So we collected a lot of data. And the first part is a distillation of our thoughts coming out of that data collection process. And from there, that informed on the next page, or page 2, our recommendations. And somebody may look at that document and say, well, it looks like you have 2 sets of recommendations. We don't. The first set is the succinct recommendation. The second set, which actually begins on page 3, flushes out some more detail to that particular recommendation. So the first part is we try to keep it to a sentence, maybe a little bit more to be tight. And then later on, we added some more meat to the bones. Now, there is on page 2, oh, wonderful. Thank you. Where it says supporting considerations, we didn't, based on our charge, we didn't feel we could make these actual recommendations, but we think the task force and therefore the commission should consider these in helps of making our recommendations more solid and absolutely carrying out what is necessary in order to fulfill those recommendations. And so that is basically how the report lays out. If you would scroll down into that where it says preliminary recommendation, yes, right in there. So you can see in that it's just a repeat of the recommendation, but there's more detail specifically related to that recommendation that allows somebody to understand what are we talking about as we move forward with that recommendation. Okay. All right, so let me go back to the top, or to the beginning of page, yes, the first recommendation. So we believe as a working group that the NAS cultivated land data is a map, is a basic base layer that should be used to map all the agricultural lands that we're considering for connectivity. It is the strongest source, the most comprehensive source, and it's work to be refreshed in a continuous manner. So it's extremely useful. It's creating that base layer. And I would say with that, you know, this is the Precision Ag Task Force, and we must lead with the ag part, which is that cultivated layer. Now, one piece that's missing and is related to grassland and pasture, in that the USGS National Land Cover data can be used to fill in that gap in the cultivated land data. There are many farmers and ranchers, you know, we talked to some certainly from Minnesota and Kansas and Montana, and I can speak a little bit to South Dakota, that to consider just somebody's operation being a cropland would be short-sighted on our part. We need to consider the broader piece that does have pasture and grazing lands connected to it. So that's what we thought would be the lead first recommendation, would be to say that base layer need to be part of, or the cultivated land layer in the National Land Cover data would make up a comprehensive base map for our precision ag mapping. First recommendation.
Any questions from the group or comments on that first recommendation? Okay, I'm hearing in Dr. Adeline. We can
Go
potentially
on.
second one. Yep.
Thank you. So the second recommendation, if we have that base layer nailed with those two pieces of data that create that map, the next piece is how do we get a comprehensive map of connectivity that covers those precision ag areas across this large country. And we felt the use of the broadband serviceable location fabric could be used to augment the data that the FCC currently has, and it would fill in the large gaps that are now present. It uses machine intelligence and other algorithms to produce data that is highly accurate and would show us where we need to have connectivity in the various cropland and rangeland across the United States. So this is a strong enhancement that would be used in order to show us the gaps in our coverage going forward. That's recommendation 2.
Any questions or comments on the second recommendation? Okay, I'm not hearing any. I guess we can move on to the third one, Dr. Adeline.
Okay, thank you. Number 3 says we need the digital opportunity data collection program needs to make sure it takes into consideration precision ag. In the way it's crafted right now, it doesn't seem to lend itself to providing information or data related to that, certainly in those agricultural lands as well as those rural communities, and that the data be made public and that it's available to all people who want to contribute to this effort. That's recommendation 3.
Any questions or comments on recommendation 3? I do have one question, Dr. Adeline. We say it needs to be made available and available for people. Is it more of are we saying available to consume or also available from a crowdsourcing perspective to be able to submit and say, I don't have, connectivity, I do need connectivity?
Yeah, Jared, that's right. It's to provide that opportunity.
Okay, for the crowdsourcing piece. Okay.
Yes. Okay, recommendation 4 really looks at, just as you indicated, the crowdsourcing piece as well, and it adds to it. And there are many methods as the group looked at opportunities. Certainly some states are taking this very seriously and trying to understand not only is connectivity available, but it's there that can be used by the local individual that needs connectivity. So we didn't want to specify a specific or specify that here's how you ought to do it, but that it needs to be done. That we need to have ground truthing and crowdsourcing, which are really 2 different things. Okay, and so we thought that was extremely important going forward. That's recommendation 4.
I'd like to comment on that recommendation because I think it's extremely important, and having come from a previous career where I was involved in comparing RF propagation models to real world measurements with field tests all times of the day, different locations, I think the boots on the ground approach has a great deal of validity. And we have a situation in agriculture where we need almost near perfect coverage for farmers to feel comfortable utilizing a technology. If they go to just one edge of a field and the system doesn't work, human nature in my world is that they're going to go back and pound on the counter at the equipment dealer and say this is no good. So this is perhaps the most important recommendation from my perspective.
Good comment. Other comments?
This is David Goldman. I had a question for a clarification. And you had mentioned that crowdsourcing and ground truthing are two different things. I think I understand what you mean, but would you mind clarifying that a little bit more to explain what you think the differences are?
So in ground truthing, you're having a third party independent, and crowdsourcing is you're pulling in individuals. I report what my connectivity is, so the end user can go on a app and report what they think they get, but what you don't know is what their router's like, how many people are in that home. You have no idea yet. So that data is valuable, but it doesn't quite get what you need.
Does that mean that if it's crowdsourced that it's less reliable, and if so, should mapping efforts be indicating which data came from crowdsources versus other, versus ground truth? Or maybe once it's crowdsourced, it needs to be ground truth, but should there be some sort of indication that says, this has been verified, this is reliable versus this is somebody's app?
Absolutely, and we discussed that, and that was a point that came out. It wasn't that we thought that it was unreliable. There's just too many parameters in there that you can't account for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Michael Gomes has a comment or question.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks. Dr. Adeline, I appreciate your approach. I was kind of surprised that you didn't call out a number of the different crowdsourced tools like OpenSignal or some of those kinds of things, so that then because there is so much validity, but you also didn't mention the dynamic range, because it's changing so much over days, or how you addressed that, because I absolutely agree with you in the difference between the ground truthing and the crowdsourcing, and I wasn't sure where you were going to go or what we had with respect to more in-depth tools in either of those, just because of the dynamic nature of broadband.
Absolutely, Michael. And so we had a pretty good discussion on that. And in the box folder, we created a spreadsheet of different approaches that could be used. We didn't feel it was our task force, our working groups task to specify. So what we did is create a table of, here are some things, here are the good points about it, here are some things that you need to consider. So what we want to do is create information for folks so that others can make that decision. We just didn't think it was in our charge. I guess that's what I would put it, Michael.
Okay, no problem. And then did you consider having the providers have to report back, or how that may interface to a mechanism in that respect?
Yes, and we have had dialogue about that, and we think that is very important. And as you can see, these are preliminary recommendations. So we want to flesh that out some more with dialogue going forward. But you hit it exactly. Absolutely. Now we need to dig in and get even more detail.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments?
Okay, number 4. So number 5. So So this one stood out to us as we listened to more subject matter individuals that on native lands, because of cultural interests and differences, in order to be effective, and that native lands do comprise quite a bit of agricultural land. Again, I can speak to South Dakota, Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming. In order to be effective and not have gaps, we need to make sure we double down on Native American communities. And it's going to be important in that effort that we work with the cultural differences and work within the community to understand more closely their needs and partner with that community to get effective data and information and inform them what we're trying to do, that will be a benefit to them going forward. So our aspect on this, or our piece of this, we felt was that in the mapping and data collection effort, that we need to work with those Native communities directly, and that's why we felt it was necessary to call them out.
Dr. Adeline, this is Dan Lightfried. Question on that is who is we in that case? Are you directing that at the FCC or a different agency in order to actually carry out that recommendation?
So in actuality, we're talking about both the USDA, so on the covered land and on the grazing land, and also the FCC. So we think both, to be effective, really need to work tightly within those communities.
Sorry, Teddy. My quick question, I guess, has to do with where you got the information around this, or who you spoke with that highlighted these differences for you.
So we spoke with an individual that is basically an ISP for the Cheyenne River Reservation. We spoke to the Blackfeet Nation group of individuals there, and then we also spoke to a farmer and rancher that farms in the Blackfeet Nation. And those reports are in box. So if you need to look those up.
Thanks.
You bet.
Hi, this is David Golden again. I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment that I think this is a really important one, and I'm really glad that you guys spent so much time looking at this. I think this is a great inclusion to your report.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on any of the 5 recommendations?
Yeah, maybe again, Dan Lightfried, Dr. Adeline, question back on number 1. Is that a comprehensive data set across all U.S. territory? I just want to make sure that there's no gaps in the NASS cultivated data or the National Land Cover data. Does it cover Hawaii, Alaska, et cetera as well?
You got me there. I was thinking of continental United States.
And that might still be better than nothing. I get that. It just might be at least ensuring that we've got the other areas covered if there is a gap there. And then when you talked about ground truthing, are there specific entities, whether it's government or other agencies, that you're recommending actually do the ground truthing, not the crowdsourcing, but the ground truthing?
Yes, and so we've seen different models. So we felt it will be important for both the USDA and the FCC to communicate with the local states, because it may be the Extension Service, okay, because they're on the boots on the ground there. Some folks we heard about like the Postal Service, because they're going everywhere. So there are different models, and what we wanted to do was present in our data, we present different models. And so there's a lot of possibilities there. But the important thing is to dialogue with the states and look at what might work for them.
Anthony Dillard has a question or a comment.
Yes. Hey, this kind of as it relates to the deployment aspect. I know on the mapping, I was curious. Should we consider like some geological and topological maps as it relates to deployment and what the options are to what the best deployment option will be? From rocky terrain to it may be something we need to consider overhead or underground, or is that something we should consider in our mapping conversation?
So let me say, just before we finished up this report, we began that dialogue. Would it be important to have a third layer related to terrain? And so one of our working group members brought that up, and we said these are preliminary, and we need to explore that further. So I anticipate that as we move forward now, that we'll begin to explore that opportunity and see what that means, because we have some folks from Montana. Well, what does the mountains mean? California, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And so certainly terrain could be very impactful, will be impactful. And how do we account for that in those agricultural lands going forward? So I see that as something as a refinement as we go forward.
Andy Bader has a question or comment.
Yeah, the question I have is based on some experience on my own farm when I was approached by a wireless carrier about building a tower at the highest part of our farm. And I reached out to friends that I have in the wireless industry to ask about how siting decisions were made and how wireless carrier mapping efforts were performed, because it was unknown to me. I know I was familiar with how this was done on the broadcasting side, where the data is all quite publicly available and you can compare your own operation versus someone else's. And yet that does not seem to be the case in the wireless world. I'm wondering what limitations that's going to cause as we go forward, in that the wireless companies keep that propagation criteria, those models, so close to the vest.
So we certainly had discussion on that, and although we thought within our charge that might not be something to make a recommendation on, but in relationship to the supporting considerations, we talked about having open data sets and having data that is available to the end user to evaluate and see what in their area is supposed to be. So that's certainly something to think about going forward. And like I said, we note some of these things in our supporting considerations, but not at the recommendation level, because we didn't feel it was within our charge to do that.
Michael Gomes has a question or comment.
Yeah, Dr. Adeline, on the follow-up piece to your recommendation number 2, it talks about the separation of the maps for 3G, 4G, 5G, and Cat-M. And is the intention that that is publicly available? And then where would we go to find that kind of material?
It is our thoughts that it would be publicly available, and they would just be layers that you could turn on and turn off, laid over the base layer. And our thinking on this is that, again, under supporting thoughts, is we have this working group between the FCC and the USDA. We're talking about precision ag, so the USDA is really the place where this needs to lie initially, and then in that collaboration allows those base layers of that data to be shared so that the other layers that you want to put over the top be available. So what you're talking about, Michael, is yes, we think it should be publicly available, and those are the things that are going to have to be worked out. But that this thing reside with the USDA.
Okay, and so your intention is that, for example, like the FCC gets the maps or has the determination, but that they're housed by USDA because then it fits with your base layers as the coverage maps.
Right.
Okay, and within that structure, it's got the different structures and things like that per your recommendation too. Is that the thinking?
Right.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
You're welcome.
One question, Dr. Adeline, I have around the digital opportunity data collection piece, right? To make sure that ensure that precision agriculture needs are taken into account on that one. Is there, do you feel like, I mean, is that something that there needs to be more discussion on? You know, would we have folks come and present how are they going to go and capture information, you know, for precision ag? Because I think we're still kind of the early stages of that, right? And trying to get funding and all that. And I'm not so sure we're there, but so maybe that's something we'll consider in the next coming months to kind of see how that progresses.
Agreed, Teddy. So we had two individuals on our working group that's quite familiar with that, and their analysis, and they presented to the working group, is that the notion of precision ag and agricultural lands within that were not overt in its presenting of that opportunity. And so they felt we needed to keep an eye on it and talk about it as a recommendation. So
that's good. Seth Arndorfer has a question or comment.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Adeline for giving the report. He's been doing a great job. There was a lot of conversation about, you know, as we track the serviceable addresses, locations, and structures, that's important. But I think, you know, as it relates to precision ag, there's a separate layer that covers the cropland itself. I think there are two different broadband needs for one, and secondly, it's two different for a broadband service provider to report on their broadband deployment capabilities to whether it be a farm or a headquarters of an agricultural operation or a grain bin or a feedlot. That's one thing, but separately would be the actual cropland itself or the pasture land. And that's a challenge, yet we still have, how do you really clearly delineate between the two?
Seth, this is Dan Leifert. I couldn't agree more, and I just want to expand on that to say, you know, and we talked about this across the course of the last year, getting connectivity, whether it's high speed or anything, to just a farmhouse is a bridge halfway on this initiative, and we absolutely need to cover every acre of land in order to extract the value out of this entire initiative. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, since we have a few minutes, Dr. Adeline, maybe you just want to quickly cover the some of the supporting considerations.
You bet. For the first one, we thought was extremely important after collecting and listening to all the subject matter people. There needs to be a working group within the federal government because there's data sources that would help tremendously in this endeavor. That it's not that they're not willing to share, but there's not a lot of information on how that might happen. In our working group, as we brought subject matter people in and they were informed on what we were doing, they go, oh, I didn't realize that, or whatever existed. And so we think it's really important that the USDA and the FCC work with different federal agencies that could provide data that would be very useful in getting a complete picture related to ag lands and connectivity across various areas, as well as in what we heard was that there are structures that could be used in order to deploy connectivity that aren't necessarily accounted for or people don't have knowledge of because the data is not necessarily shared. So we think that's important. The second one is, you know, everybody, and higher ed is certainly one that does this. We have these acronyms and we speak to each other. I mean, Teddy and I could talk about teraflops and terabytes and, you know, all that stuff, and people go, what? And so you can use a language that you're very comfortable with and familiar, but others aren't. And the key to this being successful is everybody's on the same page. And we said creating a data cookbook that explains the language used for the various metadata that's making up the maps will be extremely important. And that it's open source and available for everyone to see, to say, this is how it was defined, okay? We think that's quite important. The other thing is work with, number 3, work with each state, as well as tribal nations. Extension services is a possibility, and understanding what this is going to mean and how they, in sharing information, can help us better effectively deploy connectivity in those areas. Certainly, if the DODC is not funded, that's going to be an issue. So certainly providing adequate support funding will be important as we go forward. Identifying all structures used for radio broadcast. We certainly think there are different, so we may see a gap using fixed wire or other sources, but in fact, there may be connectivity provided in a different way. And so having that information would be important. We had a chance to talk, and Seth led up the sub-task force, talking to Google and Microsoft and the data that they have. But in sharing that private data, it gets to be a little sticky. So we need to have dialogue within the federal government of how we can support them in sharing data that might be critical, would be critical, but gives them the support in order to make that happen. And as the question came up, as I was presenting recommendations, it's important that we have standards and people understand the standards for the speed test that you're going to do in the crowdsourcing. So using the open source testing software and testing methods will be critical. using ground truthing and quality metrics and public reporting and verifiable documentation on what was done. All these things, although not directly our recommendations, are critical into the success that we would like to see moving forward.
Dr. Adeline, I have one other comment here, and that kind of piggybacks onto the question about the RF propagation data and the various topo maps that might be out there. Google did give a presentation on the tool that they have, where they flew planes over the United States, and they're over 90% of over the 90% of the geography is covered. But as the working group, we didn't feel that we should be recommending a vendor. Maybe Google is first, but maybe somebody else has that data, and that's why you don't see any specific third-party data collectors in our reports.
And again, as to what Seth, we just felt it wasn't within our charge to us, but certainly is a piece of information that's valuable.
Dan Leifried has a question, comment.
Yeah, maybe it's worth considering in the supporting considerations, the partnership with the National States Geographic Information Council, kind of a gold standard around GIS information. Let's not have the federal government go and create an alternative to something that's maybe really good already as a partner.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, comments, modifications for this working group?
I thought the idea of using the post office for data collection was genius.
That's good. I don't see anything else. So what I'd propose at this point is, obviously we want to move forward with the recommendations in the report. So now we kind of move into the voting stage. So I will take a motion to approve the recommendations in the report.
I will move to approve the recommendations submitted by Dr. Adeline.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second. This is Dan Leifried.
And second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none. Report and the recommendations are approved by the task force group, and we will submit them for this round. Awesome. So we got through the first one, so that was good. Great discussion, good questions, good comments. I thought that was great. And again, really nice work, Dr. Adeline and the rest of the working group there. I thought, like you said, there was robust conversations, robust discussions, robust supporting information as well, and then provided in a succinct way. So that was really great. Let's do this. Let's take a 9-minute break, and then we'll be back at 10:30 Eastern, 9:30 Central, and we will get started with the connectivity needs working group. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. So we got through the first report on the data mapping piece of it. Good discussions, good comments there. So now we're moving on to the second working group, which is the connectivity needs. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Leifried.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dan Leifried, working group around connectivity demand for precision agriculture. I'm going to give a little bit of a background real quick on how we got to this point, and then we'll walk through the material as the previous group did. The connectivity working group should be commended for their diligent effort over the course of the last months in working hard to gather both data, perspective, as well as put forth bold recommendations for what I would consider is a significant challenge for our agricultural industry. I think that the report is thorough, while over the course of the next year, we still have more work to do to pressure test it against our overall mandates of current and future demand and driving recommendations to help solve for that demand. While I'm pulling up the report, I'd like to ask one of our task force members that's actually on the working group as well, Andy Bader, to make some opening comments.
Thank you, Dan. I sat down last night and drafted up some commentary on where we are and what we might accomplish as a working group and as an overall task force. And so I'm going to read from that, and I'm happy to provide that as a written document as well. With some 7.8 billion people in the world, projected to be 9.9 billion by the year 2050, as farmers and ranchers, we have many mouths to feed. At the same time, we face increased operational challenges, whether it be extreme weather events like the derecho that traveled from South Dakota to Ohio, causing some $7.5 billion in damage, or the labor shortages and market disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Then, couple this with the perhaps not well appreciated statistic that many farms are actually supported by off-farm income. We struggle in my own county to identify farmers where this is not the case. Precision agriculture offers the opportunity to address these challenges through increased yields, increased capability, and increased flexibility. At the same time, it improves our farmers' economic viability while reducing environmental impact. As I've studied this sector by being part of the Connectivity Demand Working Group, I have come to the opinion that precision agriculture is being held back. We gather today, of course, because of the widely known and acknowledged disparity of broadband accessibility across the United States. My interest in this issue in my home state of Pennsylvania is part of the reason I am here. Certainly, we can all agree that poor internet service is a gating factor. There is more, though. There are so many talented agriculturists, scientists, and engineers working in precision agriculture, private industry, land-grant universities, startup ventures, etc. I'm amazed at what I have learned about what is possible. Unfortunately, what seems to be lacking is overall coordination across all entities. Everyone is rowing awfully hard, but the precision agriculture boat would move faster if the oars dipped into the water at the same time. What precision agriculture needs is coordination and funding at a scale seldom seen in modern times, a Manhattan Project level effort. This is a charter that extends well beyond what was envisioned for our group, but I believe it is essential and that it must be spoken. Humanity itself depends on us getting precision agriculture right. The lives of millions, if not billions, are at stake.
Thanks, Andy. Really appreciate your comments. So as the chairman recommended through the process, we'll walk down through the general sections, not dwelling on the details until we get to overall recommendations. Maybe pausing here on the table of contents in order to give the general structure, introduction and background, overview of the needs, both current as well as future technology opportunities in precision ag and how connectivity helps to solve for that. Elements around data, bandwidth, and spectrum are also included in the communications technology overview. And then we start to talk more about the benefits, both directly related to precision ag as well as indirect benefits, moving then into our preliminary and recommendations for the other working groups. So I'll skip forward. One item of note is on page 18. Excuse me as I move to that. There will be a proposed change coming through after today, a late recommendation from a technical standpoint on page 19. We urged the deployment working group to move forward with analyzing the spectrum requirements to support terrestrial and non-terrestrial precision agricultural deployment and connectivity. This was not included in our comments for other working groups, so we respectfully ask to be able to make that adjustment post today's meeting and move that comment also to that section in order for it to be noted. And then there was a technical recommendation where the working group referred to the FCC's definition around broadband, and we will adjust the nomenclature there to say advanced connectivity instead of broadband. Those would be two post submission adjustments. With that, Teddy, would you be okay if I move to the recommendations phase, knowing that others have had a chance to review at least the base level of material prior to this session?
Absolutely. I appreciate you walking through the structure and the table of contents and noting those two changes. I think that was great. So yeah, recommendations.
Thank you. I'll get there as quickly as I can. So noting our first preliminary recommendation, again, as was stated in the first working group, we have more work to do over the course of the next year, but we wanted to get preliminary recommendations captured as part of our first annual report. As stated here, the connectivity working group strongly recommends that the FCC include up to $500 million in incentives and subsidies from the overall $9 billion 5G fund for rural America to drive creation and adoption of edge computing, private 5G systems on the farm, and precision agricultural applications so that the critical infrastructure and tools needed to deploy precision ag can be developed and deployed. Additionally, the connectivity working group recommends that additional funding be set aside on future versions of the USDA Reconnect program.
Any questions or comments on this recommendation?
Daniel, this is Mike Adeline. So I read this and I wondered if this is the best approach in order to fund what you were looking for. I wondered if a USDA mechanism, which is normally where agriculture would look to get funding related to various programs, whether that be soil conservation or other agricultural activities, would that be a more viable approach? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think my thoughts as I look at the $9 billion fund, where $1 billion of it was appropriated for precision ag specifically. This is probably building off of that to say it's broader than just the connectivity element. There are other elements of deploying edge computing. The 5G systems would be somewhat included already in the 1 billion, and driving precision ag applications in order to drive the value to the actual producer. We believe that leveraging off of that base level idea of the $9 billion fund made sense. However, it could be expanded to USDA funding as well.
Okay, thank you.
This is David Goldman. This is kind of just a clarification question here. So the FCC actually, as you're referencing, adopted rules yesterday. I don't think the final order has come out for this 5G fund. Can you, are you able to compare what your recommendation is? I think you just did it, but I just want to make sure I have it. I completely understand it. Compare what your recommendation is versus what they just adopted yesterday.
Yeah, David, I apologize. I'm unaware of the actual outcome of yesterday's meeting. I knew it was happening, but I'm not fully up to speed on that. Could you go on mute for a second, David, just so we don't get the feedback? However, with that, I will clarify, again, structurally coming into this working group, We knew of the $9 billion fund, of which $1 billion was appropriated to go towards precision ag. What we're recommending is 500 of the remaining 800 or $8 billion, 500 million of the remaining $8 billion also be extended into the precision ag area. Just if that helps to at least clarify our team's recommendation. I can't appropriately compare and contrast that relative to the rulemaking from yesterday.
Right. So I totally understand that. So essentially, you're saying, so there's already 1 billion. You're saying put another $500 million on top of that for these other purposes.
That's correct.
Understood.
And Dan, quick question on the $500 million that's proposed here for edge computing, the private systems and applications. Is that? Do you think that's enough, or is it just kind of a starting point?
I think a little. I'll give you my perspective, and I'd love for Andy to weigh in if he's got a perspective as well. But I think it's a starting point. To Andy's point earlier, this task of driving our agricultural industry forward to global leadership to solve the three major problems that Andy referenced, which is food security, second, environmental sustainability through improved practices, and third, economic viability of the actual industry and the producers themselves. I think that this is a starting point, and we wanted to be bold in order to recommend getting started rather than studying forever.
Dr. Adeline has a question or comment.
So Daniel, the other thing I wondered is, have you thought, so large producers certainly will go to precision ag by their very nature, but this country does have significant small, medium size. How do we, if that's going to be available, how do we address the need where they may not be as competitive, or where the dollars may tend to go towards the larger LLCs, if I want to say it that way?
Yep. Thanks for the comment, Dr. Adeline. You will note it in our kind of conclusions and next steps. We talk about we need to ensure that these programs have high levels of equalness or equitableness across all ranges of farm sizes as well as different sectors. We don't believe that precision ag is only for those with scale. We believe that the tools, the practices are appropriate from large to small, and from livestock to small grains to large grains, et cetera. But we will utilize the next year to pressure test and ensure that our recommendations cover all producers and not just one category.
Thank you.
Andy Bader has a question or comment.
I'd also like to address Dr. Adeline's comment, because I perceive one of the reasons why I'm in this task force is that I am a very small farmer, and I work with farmers of all sizes and scales. And so I can assure you that this is something I think about a lot, because I have friends who farm at the less than acre size, and I have friends who run 5,000 cows. And so we need to address every farm, whether it's an extremely small boutique organic operation or whether it's thousands of acres like my cousins in the upper New York State area. And so I'm on this, and I will work on this.
Thanks, Andy.
I don't see any other questions or hands. Dan, I think we can move on to the next recommendation.
Thank you. Second recommendation is the Connectivity Working Group also recommends the Commission provide incentives to network service providers for 5G coverage of agricultural fields and pasture lands as a provision within the 5G Fund for Rural America. We also encourage the Commission to promote and incent the adoption of virtual solutions such as Open RAN while making additional unlicensed and shared spectrum available in rural and highly agricultural areas.
Any questions or comments on this specific recommendation? Dr. Adeline?
So Daniel, when I wondered about this with incentives, do you have thoughts on how, if incentive is in fact given, that there's follow through on actually that they've done what they said they would do?
I have personal thoughts, and I believe that collectively amongst our working group, we know that it needs to be a closed loop system of accountability for any funds given, that there should be follow up to ensure that they're implemented and used as proposed. I think that that's an area that we could strengthen our recommendation in order to call that out more specifically, Dr. Adeline, to your comment.
Thank you.
And if it would help in order to have this approved, I would recommend that appropriate language be added at the end of this in order to incorporate that into this report submission.
Hey Dan, this is Jesse. Just want to understand if there's specific language that you'd like to add. Exactly what that language would be. We know what, so we know what's going to be voted on.
Yeah, I'll make it up a little bit on the go, Jesse, to be straight, but it would be something paraphrased around. Somebody could go on mute. I'm getting feedback. It would be something paraphrased around the fact that after the word areas in the period, it would be additionally any funds provided relative to these incentives will also have the appropriate level of closed loop oversight to ensure that the funds were deployed in line with the proposals that were made and approved. That's the best I can do on the fly. I will do my best to make it very close to that level of language. If others have recommendations, I'm also open to that.
I think that sounds good. David Goldman?
Thank you. This is kind of combining the first two. I'm kind of struck by how the first two recommendations both are very technology specific, about specifically that it's 5G that needs to solve the problem. And nothing against 5G. 5G sounds great, but is there a reason that you focused on a single technology? Is it possible that this could be maybe expanded to maybe be more performance based rather than technology specific, and say, we need technologies that are mobile and high speed and low latency, something along those lines, as opposed to designating in advance what the technology solution has to be?
David, I'm absolutely open to that. I think it's, again, after having several conversations with our working group over the course of the last 6 months, we know that there's not a one size fits all. I think that we utilize the language 5G here because it's in line with the 5G Fund for Rural America, which I think is also broader than just one technology, to your point. But I'm open to a suggested edit relative to broadening it to make it more technology agnostic.
Thank you very much. And so, Jesse, how would I go about doing that? I think it would be basically what I was just suggesting, is just, make it a high speed, low latency mobile, rather than naming a specific technology. But just as a process, how would I go about suggesting that?
Jesse, not audible yet.
Can you hear me now?
Somewhat.
All right, let me try and move and not give everybody to work. Can you guys see me or hear me all right?
That's better.
All right, great. Yeah, so I think under the circumstances that we're all virtual here, David, if you have a moment, I suggest sending an email to the group with the proposed changes. And Teddy, we can kind of maybe set aside these two recommendations to the extent there's not time or something. But David, if you have a chance to kind of maybe send those specific edits, everybody can look at them kind of in real time. And when we end up voting on the recommendations, kind of at the end of the presentation here, that can be the line that can be what people are voting on.
Great. Can I use Teddy's email from last night can I just email off of that to make sure that I'm getting the right group when I send it?
Yeah, I think that'd be fine. And then Teddy,
Okay.
we can kind of separate those two recommendations out in the voting.
I will do that. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean,
so I'll just,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, so I'll just hit reply all to the one from last night, and I'll put my proposal up on that. But so thank you.
Yeah, and I think we can give everybody a moment to look at that to have time and we can vote on it now, or if people still need time, we can vote on it at the end of the day. I'm open to any other suggestions, or if any of my colleagues have anything to add here in terms of how this works. But I mean, I think that sounds fine to me.
We'll go with that, Jesse, unless somebody else comes up with something else. So I think we should be able to get that accomplished. Steve has a question or comment.
Yeah, Dan, relative to the conversation about, again, accountability and follow through when incentives are given, just to make you aware, we have worked on some language in one of our recommendations, and it was primarily around in auctions and auction bidders. Requirement of showing long-term sustainability and scalability of their proposed networks. So we have some, I think would maybe be some helpful language, maybe as we continue to flush this out down the road. So we will definitely be sharing that. So.
Perfect. I will start with the proposal that we went with in order to move this forward, while over the course of the next year, we would refine that to be more specific in line with what you're potentially recommending.
Okay, so we're making the adjustments we just talked about. Any other last comments, questions? Okay, Dan, I think we can move on.
Third recommendation, work within the standards bodies, an example, not an all-inclusive list, 3GPP, to develop data standards for precision agriculture that will promote economies of scale and ease the burden of adoption for agricultural community. This includes establishing minimum up-down transmission thresholds, and our recommendation is to increase from the current standard of 25.3 for realities of precision ag and quality of service standards. Both non-terrestrial and terrestrial technologies are important to include in this work.
Michael Gomes has a question or comment.
Yeah, Dan, good stuff. One of the things I saw it mentioned in the body of the report, but you didn't mention specifically here symmetry of service, and I wasn't sure how much your committee had looked into that, or if you'd considered and then taken it specifically out of this recommendation.
Yeah, I understand your point, Michael. In the rephrase, in the actual body of the report, we made specific citations around driving symmetry, and here we left it more generic. I don't know if that was an oversight on our part, but if you have a recommendation that we should strengthen this in order to drive that symmetry of service, I'm open to that as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, I would like to insert symmetrical service establishing minimum up-down transmission threshold to achieve symmetry of service for to achieve symmetrical service. That right after the increase of 20 from 25.3, just to reiterate the point of symmetrical service.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I think it's in line with what is stated in the body of the report.
It seemed to be, and that's why I thought, but it wasn't specifically mentioned, and so that I thought it added something. That's all.
Thank you. Yep.
Yep. Thanks.
Teddy, anything else or move forward?
Sorry. David Goldman has a question or comment.
Yeah, I do actually. In response to the symmetry, I just want to flag in advance. I actually have concerns about stressing the symmetry. I wasn't sure in the report that it actually gave adequate. I understand it. I think that there was a lot of evidence for why upload speeds need to be increased. I wasn't sure that I saw evidence of why the matching exactly with the download speed is the magic number. And I think that it's a significant limiter on what your options are, including, frankly, I mean, in some ways, some of this is in conflict. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about how there needs to be wireless, to cover the farm. There's got to be wireless mobile options. Spectrum is often not allocated symmetrically. So by stressing symmetry as opposed to increased upload speeds, I think I'm not sure all the suggestions actually fit together, nor do I think that it's actually achievable in any reasonable time frame, because I think in some ways it would require, in order to be able to get done what you're trying to get done, it would require reallocations of spectrum. And so I think it's fair. I think it's a good idea to say that upload speeds need to be increased, but I have not seen in any of the reports, I haven't seen any evidence that it's somehow, by making it symmetric as opposed to just an increase in the upload speeds, somehow is a magic number, that it has to be upload has to match precisely on what the download is. So I just want to let you know in advance that if we put the symmetric in, I'm going to have concerns with that.
I understand, David. Are there any other comments around that? I'd like to make sure that others have an opportunity to weigh in as well, in order for us to get this adjusted correctly the first time if possible.
This is not a well-formed comment because I don't have research at my fingertips, but anecdotally, as we've been talking about this, we are aware of efforts to measure the data that is available in a farm field, and that might be updated to a central location while a combine or a tractor are passing across that field. And it's a huge amount of data. And it might be data that includes images of weeds or of tissue of plants. And so I struggle with the notion that we're already limiting our future capability as to how much data we can upload by the acre because we think that it's going to be a problem. I think we need to think bigger than that.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from there, Andy, and I believe what your comment is referring to is the upload speeds are actually insufficient today. I think, to Mr. Goldman's point, that the problem here with making any recommendation that drives to a symmetry might actually impede what we actually want in the end as well. We might need even more upload. Just as an example, it might be 25/30 instead of 25/3. The absolute point that I think our team is trying to make is the current standards relative to 25.3, and it's in particular on the 3 side, 3 is not sufficient for where we're at or where we're going relative to precision ag. I think the second half of that needs to be increased, and I would ask that the team itself come back with more concrete. This is on us collectively as a working group, that we come back with more concrete minimums on the upload speed after the next year. But at this point in time, I think we want to strongly stress that the standard of 25.3, and in particular on the upload side, is insufficient as we drive this across rural America. David Goldman, is that in line with your perspective?
That is 100%. If that's what you say, I completely agree with that. I think that 3 is way too low. I completely support increasing it. Like I said, it's just my concern is just the idea that there has to be an exact match, and I'm not sure that you said it better than I did, so I will leave it at that. But I think the way that you described it is completely in line with what I was saying. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so it looks like Dr. Adeline?
Yeah, the only thing, and this is kind of anecdotal related to that relationship. So when I first started this role at SDSU as a technology person, people were running off desktops to do their analysis. Then within a couple of years, we had a cluster that was 0.9 of a terabyte. Today, we're pushing close to 35 teraflops, all right? So let me put a math problem with that, and this is something we wouldn't have known when we worked on it. We were working on developing drugs for fighting cancer. And the initial analysis took 2 months to work on part of the problem. Now we're doing 60,000 permutations in 20 seconds. Would I have anticipated that? Probably not. I knew there was a need, but we filled it and we're going beyond it. So I think you really need to think, we don't know how this is going to scale particularly. And I hear the symmetry, I understand the symmetry piece, but I don't know if we can choose wording that allows the symmetry. It may be that it's really on the upload side, because I'm thinking about what kind of data we're going to get locally, and it might be quite significant. So I don't know if we can open that language up a little bit, because the one thing I can tell you, and Mr. Chair, you know this in your position, technology goes where technology goes, and it can vastly overrun you in a very short period of time. And the one thing to turn off our producers is that they really get interested in doing something and there's not the capacity. So I'm not sure of what language, but something that could be a little bit open in its concept. Thank you.
Understand. Thank you.
Michael Gomes?
Yeah, Dan, I'd be up to something at or near symmetrical service. I think you guys are hitting on the point that the idea that the upload speed, I mean, today's piece is, the standard today of 25.3 download, 3 upload is basically one-way traffic. And my point in symmetrical service, it's the easiest way to get the upload near the download. Right. And so it doesn't have to be matched exactly symmetrical, but at or near symmetrical is much closer than the, 7x, 8x number you got today. That's all.
Yep. understand. I think we're all in alignment there. And I appreciate David Goldman's point that the last thing we want to do is drive any technology standard that makes it challenging to actually implement or a barrier to move forward with reducing that 8-to-1 gap, as you're pointing out, Michael. So we'll come up with the right language there to drive the points that we need to.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right, Dan, let's move on to the next one.
Perfect. Lively discussion, exactly what I hoped for. Fourth one, liaise with state legislative bodies on current and proposed policies incentivizing broadband and technology investments across agricultural lands for model frameworks, i.e. what is working and what is not, before defining federal programs or allocated funding. I think this is just a common sense recommendation to say the federal government doesn't need to do this in isolation. There are states and state bodies or local bodies that understand how to do this as well, and learning from each other rather than creating all new things in a vacuum is important. That's probably the paraphrase of what this common sense recommendation is about.
Dr. Adeline? Dr. Adeline, if you look like you're still on mute.
Okay.
There we go.
Try this again. I agree 100%. And I think the cross-link between the mapping group and your group, I think there's some synergy in this particular recommendation from our group. So I think it's extremely important. Thank you.
Michael Gomes?
Yeah, an example of this that we came up with in our working group was the state of Mississippi, and they've done some really interesting and creative work in this respect. It was good stuff.
Other questions or comments? Okay, let's move on, Dan.
Fifth recommendation is probably a supplemental piece to just ensure that we think about resiliency of the communications network, not just the communications network itself being single path. So it's stated as such: incent the resiliency of communications networks supporting precision ag to ensure that the ag community is able to function even during the worst natural and man-made disasters. This should include path diversity of different networks and technologies. So as much as anything, as we implement these systems, we don't want them to be single path. We want them to be resilient to disruption.
Questions, comments on this recommendation? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to the next one, Dan.
The last one is work considered for next year, or over the course of the next year for the working group. We do believe that getting a better sampling of data in order to drive our decisions is important. So our recommendation is to administer an email survey in the early part of 2021 to a large sample size of broadacre and specialty farmers, ranchers, communication service providers, equipment manufacturers, and software providers to capture qualitative and quantitative feedback on aggregate bandwidth usage from current precision ag technologies, satisfaction with current connectivity options, methods, and cost of internet connections to systems and endpoint devices, willingness to adopt or try new technologies, inflection points for investments in precision ag technologies, and ranking of precision ag use cases and forward-looking verbatim to uncover trends. Leverage this survey data to accurately capture current broadband usage by farm type, size, geography, and forecast aggregated connectivity demand as part of our overall charge. So we specifically put this in here knowing the Paperwork Reduction Act will be something that we'll have to operate within, and we wanted to see if we had the overall task force support in order to go through the effort to overcome this.
Dr. Adeline?
So Dan, I believe they're already doing surveys and they're redoing the structure within the USDA on the survey that they're going to send out to farmers and ranchers. So I think the way this could be done is that a task force or a recommendation to that group, because they're revising the questions related to this. So having dialogue with NAS might be useful for your group to understand what they're doing and what they view going forward.
And piggyback
there is
off
an
of
effort
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay. I'm not seeing any other ones. Dan, why don't we quickly, there were some recommendations for the other task force working groups. We're not going to dwell on each one, but maybe you can quickly kind of walk through all of them there, and so that everybody has awareness of that, and then we'll move on to the next piece.
Thanks, Teddy. And again, I want to note that we will make the modification from that recommendation that was in the spectrum section on page 19 for the working group around deployment. So that will be included in this section in the edits as well. Quickly looking at the mapping and analyzing connectivity working group, identify types of connectivity maps and metrics that would be most appropriate to determine the need for additional broadband coverage to support precision ag adoption. Recommendations to USDA on how they can obtain regular data to determine usage levels. This could be the basis of measure of accountability for funds awarded, back to some of our earlier discussion. And there's no national bandwidth coverage maps currently in production, but there are several states that have formal programs to capture this data. We recommend using the state model to generate various maps of connectivity with USDA ag data to capture more accurate data in near real time. Again, I think that these were in line with some of even our open discussion earlier, that collaboration between the federal government and the state government and utilizing the best available source that we have now and iterating on it is appropriate. I don't think that there's anything earth-shattering in here that hasn't already been discussed.
Okay.
And then the accelerating broadband deployment group. We also, back to Andy Bader's opening comments, we believe that this is broader than just getting the connectivity issue solved. We believe it's also about driving precision ag utilization in order to solve the big challenges. So determine what kind of outreach or marketing would be most successful to drive the adoption of precision ag by farm owners and agriculture workers. Work with the USDA to identify key farm metrics and crops to target expansion of broadband coverage that will maximize food security of the United States and maximize economic stability or promote growth by enabling expanded use of precision ag practices. Determine the best methods to promote adoption of precision technologies and practices through targeted incentives such as tax credits that are commensurate with public benefits generated from adoption. And then I'll let the group read the following three. And then looking at the final one around adoptions and jobs, again, knowing that our working groups in the first year have been quite independent. I think as we looked at the material and had discussions along the way, these were just some of our observations in order to ensure that we have a comprehensive integrated task force look at the effort.
Okay, so any questions, comments on on the overall document or any of the specific recommendations, knowing that we do have to make a couple of edits to a couple of the recommendations, which we'll get to that in a second. But any general comments on the overall report? I don't see any, Dan. I think, I mean,
Teddy?
oh, go ahead. There was one comment maybe.
Hey, Teddy, this is Jesse. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think maybe it was clear in the report, but when we look at the recommendations for the other working group, that is something separate than what the task force is adopting here. So the task force is more adopting the recommendations in the report, but those recommendations for the other working groups are not being voted on. The working group saying this is what we think the working group is like.
Right. No, and the reason for going over them is just to make sure that the chairs of the other working groups, as well as the members of the other working groups, had knowledge of what the groups were saying. And you can see some of them have, or maybe have been, or have been started to be addressed. Some others maybe haven't been thought of yet, but just want to get clarity to that. But to Jesse's point, when we vote on the report, we're going to vote on the main recommendations from this working group, as well as the details of the report that are not including this recommendations for the other working groups. Okay, so I didn't see any other questions or comments. Overall, I mean, Dan, from my perspective, I think that the team did a really nice job here. There's a lot of depth into this document. You know, my only comment was really around that first one around the appropriation of the $500 million for the to Precision Ag from the 5G fund. I think in general, that one, like we said earlier, is a starting point. There's no need to change anything that's in there right now. But really, it's more of, as we go into the next year, right, as we get into the details of that, it'll be important to say, you know, not only that we have to identify exactly what it means, but whether it's 5G or any other technology. I think one of the comments you and Andy have made is that every acre needs to be covered, right? And if we're going to use capabilities and technologies like 5G, that's a costly investment, and it's not going to be 500 million or $1 billion for that matter. So this is a starting point to learn, and then obviously, and with that, what we can do is learn how much more productive farmers can be on their lands, and how much more insights we can get out of these technologies once they're implemented. So just a general comment there for the working group to look into it as kind of the next phase. So one thing I would suggest here is let's take a 10-minute break. In that break,
Teddy, I'm sorry. Could I suggest, or I'll at least ask on kind of the procedural element of making these modifications.
Yeah.
I think we've got a couple of options. I'll propose two. One is I could take the comments and make the edits even over the course of the rest of the meeting in order to have us come back and execute the vote on the recommendations prior to the end of the day. The other one is we could adopt them as recommended with edits pending over the course of the next 3 days, or whatever other procedural elements could be put in place. I'm just trying to figure out how to close the loop on the edits as suggested.
No, absolutely. So that's what I was going to say. What I was going to suggest is if we took a 10-minute break, right? I think David Goldman has sent an email with sort of a recommended. You actually also proposed some language in one of them in there. What I was going to say is if we could take the next 10 minutes, you know, that way the meeting's not ongoing at the same time. We could try to make the edits. If you feel comfortable that, you know, it's something that we could propose, then we can vote on it as it stands. If you feel like at the end of after the 10 minutes, well, no, there's more required, to your point, we can adopt it as is, knowing that there's changes coming. And come back from break, we can take a look at that. So I just want to give us some breathing room to be able to do that without the meeting progress. So it's 11:20 Eastern, 10:20 Central. Let's give it 10 minutes, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Glad we had the chance to have that quick break. We were able to quickly get together as a team, and what we're going to do is we're going to consider the edits should be able to get them today. So instead of voting on the connectivity needs at the moment, we'll postpone that later during this meeting. And at that time, we'll be able to do it back and show the updated recommendations, and we'll vote on those recommendations as well as the overall report. So in the meantime, what we'll do is transition over to the Adoption and Jobs Working Group. And Mr. McCormick is going to walk us through the kind of the structure of the document, the thinking, and then the recommendations themselves. So while he starts, I will share the document at the same time. Mr. McCormick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to be here with you today to talk about the work that the Adoption and Jobs Subcommittee has been working on. Our charges as given to us was to promote effective policy and regulatory solutions that encourage the adoption of broadband internet access service on farms, ranches, and promote precision ag. To carry out that charge, we were told to evaluate whether and how the adoption of precision ag, including automated farming, can alleviate problems for farmers, ways that government, including the Commission, the Department of State and Local Governments, can promote adoption, ways that government, including the Commission, the Department of State and Local Governments, can promote community college and universities so that they can continue to grow programs, means for government to partner with industry and stakeholders to promote the adoption, the obstacles farmers and ranchers are facing to adopting precision agriculture, which our group focused a lot on, whether any work has been done in the area to date on whether these lessons from adoption in context to applying precision ag, connected farms, context, and the metrics the commissions could apply to measure and track progress. Our committee group was very actively engaged. We took our charge seriously that each member should be engaged and had a big influence on the report that we're about to give today. Myself and our Vice Chair, Julie Bichelle, who did a lot of work on putting this platform together, Dale Artho and Mike Gomes, who are on the task force, with Robert Blair, Lenny Blakesney, Dr. Dennis Buckmaster, Russ Elliott, Michelle Erickson Jones, Jose Caveira, Robert Hance, Keith Kazmarek, who came on late in the process and replaced Aaron Klein, who was a great committee member, Trenton Kissee, Rob McDonald, Russ Piotr, and Josh Seidman and Dan Spray all did work, and all of our committee were very actively engaged. Beginning in April 2020, our work group started and launched our meetings and continue to work weekly through our priorities. And before I get into what our report is given, I'd like to give Mike Gomes and Dale Artho just a minute or two to talk about their work on our committee. So, Mike, why don't you go with this point?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, our committee, as Michael had said, our committee pretty extensively researched a number of subjects. We're very proud of the body of work that you have there that uncovers a number of the various issues and opportunities around rural broadband as it applies to precision agriculture. And so we're very happy to provide those recommendations. We see much of today's efforts as a foundation from which to build, and a foundation from which to build out the additional work over the next year. And so with that, Dale, did you have anything else to add or your comments?
No, I'm good. I got grandkids in the background, so you guys just keep going.
Well, I appreciate their support, Mr. Chairman, and we'll start off with our report on connectivity. And on page 1, we realize that is a broad topic that was covered by some of the other working groups, but obviously we feel very certain that one of the lack of connectivity is a barrier to precision agriculture and its adoption and availability of high quality jobs. We did not make any recommendations on that as such, but certainly a lot of our discussions were centered around the lack of connectivity that we're facing. The first platform that our group identified was the incentives for farmers to adopt and use precision agriculture. While that focus in the task force and rural broadband is centered more on connectivity issues, connectivity is just one of the many aspects of where what are we talking about. Several factors create barriers for more rapid and increased adoption. Certainly cost was something that we talked about a lot. They have to come down a good bit for widespread adoption, especially on smaller farms across the U.S. Average age of our farmers are working against us on adoption, and they may not want to invest in this new technology at their age or learn the skills to have that adoption. The support from the machinery dealerships can be an issue with the installation and troubleshooting and the lack of technology there on the farms to do that can be something that adoption discourages. Lending can be a key issue with farm loans during economic hardships. That type of lending for precision ag tends to be a little bit harder to get, and the private industry and the land grants have not done an adequate job of showing the lending institutions that financial benefits of our management and our applications in relations to those farm loans. Government programs like USDA uses in EQIP and CSP that encourage farmers on precision ag have not progressed traditionally to reward and incentivize precision ag and collection of that data. And then government regulations certainly tend to be obstacles with things like the beyond visual line of sight, EPA's approved method of application on labels, and not fully capitalizing on precision agricultural technologies, and applicator licenses, which is each state can require different things. So we made some recommendations along that line. The first one, Mr. Chairman, and I guess we can talk about them as we go through, is the USDA highlight through the USDA as highlighted through the 2018 Farm Bill. Precision agriculture and precision ag technologies are recognized as critical to conservation, productivity, and profitability. Therefore, precision ag and precision ag technology should be established as best management practices throughout that department. The second one is crop insurance, that RMA through precision ag premium reduction. When farmers utilize precision ag equipment and data management, they should lower their operational risk profile in each cropping year and establish crop records that create sustainable long-term value of historical practice. A reduction in premiums to reflect those lower risks would encourage farmers to adopt that precision ag. Third, on ag lending, the USDA Farm Service Agency Precision Ag Loan Guarantee. The FSA should work with traditional farm lenders and with their own lending arm to guarantee loans for producers to purchase direct costs, labor reducing precision agricultural equipment services, recognizing them as best management practices. Fourth, conservation payments. USDA's FSA Precision Ag Environmental Payment, NRCS, EQIP Incentive Program, and Regional Conservation Partnership Program. As highlighted through the 2018 Farm Bill, precision ag technologies are recognized as critical to conservation, production, and its profitability. Therefore, precision ag technology and practices should be recognized as best management practice, and direct payments for utilization of that should be determined. And fifth, USDA modernization. The USDA should implement department and agency-wide interoperability, symmetry of internal program formats to utilize operator-driven data for future operator mandatory reporting on farm program creation and cohesive agency interaction of the data. Continued implementation of USDA IT modernization initiatives is critical for encouraging precision ag adoption. And last on that, number 6, agricultural regulation relief. Congress should expedite beneficial regulation creation for precision ag use and implementation in order to keep up with quickly evolving technologies and practices. Congress should allow a national applicator license to help business maximize their ability to operate interstate.
So Mike, let's stop there and then see for this block of recommendations if there's any questions or comments from the task force members.
Sounds good.
Yeah, my only additional comment would be that we chose the best management practices language so that then it could more accurately mimic or be reflected in what's in the same language that's in the Farm Bill, as well as that used by extension, so that then people could easily understand how these things fit into their existing landscape and workflow.
Other questions or comments from the members? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I will share again, and Mr. McCormick, we can continue.
We'll move on with the interoperability of precision ag technology platform. One of the common topics that we discussed among the adoption subcommittee is that the absence of interoperability among precision ag and equipment technologies. Priority should be focused on improving technology interfaces and having the ability to exchange information across multiple platforms. Interoperability will encourage and increase the adoption of precision ag. There are many stakeholders that are involved in that through multiple crowd platforms. Data and agriculture is an immature market, and we recognize that. One of the things that we discussed was that this interoperability is much like what we saw earlier in my farming career with hydraulic ends not being universal, and that there's a need to be able to hook different equipment to different platforms and be able to get up and running. And that's a huge impediment to adoption if we don't get to some type of commonality. So we can skip down to the recommendation, Teddy. The one recommendation that came was that USDA and FCC should collaborate with industry stakeholders and academia to establish a standard for interoperability.
Any questions, comments about this specific recommendation? Okay, we'll continue.
All right, the next platform that we're putting out, and we recognize this as a living and breathing document that we're working on. We appreciate the opportunity to get started with it today, and we look at it as something that we'll be continuing to build on through future meetings. But the next bullet point is data collection, security management, and analytics. There are several considerations around data collection, security and management, and analytics that must be addressed in order to accelerate adoption of precision ag. The report, I think, that everybody's read moves forward through that, and the recommendations that our committee came up with was one, the improvement of use and encouragement towards federal reporting and compliance agencies of USDA, NASS, FSA, RMA, and NRCS, and other agencies to align their existing and individual file management systems to have the capability to receive electronic data layers that are often created through the normal course of farm operations as cited through this document. There's some examples given. The entire system breaks down if the individual agencies refuse to accept the information as reported electronically. That's our recommendation, and then we have a recommendation for maybe one of the other working groups, Mr. Chairman.
Before we kind of highlight that one real quick, any questions or comments from the group on this specific recommendation? Dr. Adeline?
Yes, so just a concern with language in there where you talk about, let me look into my papers quick here. Can you pop it back up on the screen quick?
I can. Just 1 second. Okay.
The word compliance, so and then you list all the agencies, and there's agencies that are not compliance agencies. So could that be worded just to encompass federal agencies and not have the word compliance to confuse or have some misinterpretation by the reader? The other piece that I wondered is in receiving data from an end user where you're a federal agency and you're not sure of the metadata behind it would certainly be a concern. So somehow maybe you refer to receiving unstructured data, that they have a process for receiving unstructured data and how that would be handled. Because you might, once it goes public, you might address the consumer of that, saying, hey, we have this unstructured data. This is what we interpret out of that and what it may mean in relationship to what you're looking at. So something in that nature. I think those were the two like that.
So on your first point, Dr. Adeline, would reporting rather than compliance be acceptable?
Yes.
Okay, so if we just turn compliance to reporting, that would work. And then on your second point, with respect to the different interoperability pieces, that's where we had the previous figures or those graphics that help to illustrate the comment, that help to illustrate how that resolution is different, and each one of those reporting agencies takes different information. And so we felt that those accurately articulated some of those challenges of interoperability, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Dr. Adeline, on your recommendation, I think we just strike the compliance agencies. Do we also want to strike listing the government agencies that you talked about and just list other agencies or other government agencies to align that and not specifically work through each one, or do you want to?
No, I think that approach would be very good. At least that's my thought.
Well, Mike, I don't think that changes our report or the content in it. I think I would be okay with that.
Okay.
Okay. So the only thing we're saying here is just removing this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think he wants to eliminate the specific government agency listed and just have government agencies there.
Okay.
I don't think that changes the intent. It just broadens it some.
Okay, let me just see if there's any other questions or comments. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Mr. McCormick, you can continue.
All right, we do have a recommendation, and for one of the other alternate working groups is that agricultural production utilizes both downstream and upstream networking. Implementation of a network that provides download and upload capacity symmetrically or at near symmetrical level is critical to precision ag adoption. The agricultural producers' data outputs are just as decisive as their inputs. And as equipment continues to become more connected, this becomes increasingly important. We just would ask that one of the other groups examining current and future connectivity demand working group should explore that recommendation if the task force approved.
And again, we're to the group, we're not voting on this, and actually we just had a kind of a robust discussion. Dan is making some edits, so I think this is well taken and will be addressed in that current and future connectivity demand working group.
All right. There is one other recommendation based off of some cyber security and protection that was included in that report, and that is that the federal cybersecurity and cyber protection policy provide for farm and farm data records to be recognized at levels that is equal to any other independent business entity. It should be recognized that farm data and records are matter of national security, and such data should be considered highly sensitive, and malicious acts should be treated accordingly.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the group on this recommendation? Okay, I'm not seeing any. We can continue.
The next platform is existing funding mechanisms should pivot to precision agriculture. An important consideration as policymakers encourage continued expansion of connectivity to support precision agriculture is needed to ensure that funding mechanisms enable comprehensive support for deployment that enables connectivity through cropland within among farm structures, facilities, and equipment. We talked a lot about using data points on the farm and not just having a one point of use as being the home or the headquarters. All of those data points, including tractors, sprayers, everything there that is using data needing to be used as point of collections. Adoption can be expected to increase as the cost of the components decrease, and the inclusion of farms and farmland and broadband mapping as potential users are extremely important, and how farmland is to be accounted, require an examination of current and anticipated precision ag needs for livestock and for cropping systems. I'm moving on to page 15, Teddy. Everyone's read through this. Weighting of farms served when contemplating high-cost support allocations. USDA's Reconnect program paves the way for FCC to offer specific consideration in the USF and CAF high-cost programs for farmland. This can be accomplished by including the cost of connecting farm fields and facilities to broadband. And recognizing that precision ag relies both on fixed and mobile connections, fiber networks will always be necessary to provide sufficient backhaul capability. So a lot of in-farm work on that, and the recommendation was to an alternative working group for that. It felt like that one of the other groups would be better in handling that, looking at our charges. And that is the recommendation will be for FCC to accelerate the subsidized investment in ag lands through existing and new mechanism to advance technology and adoption in ag and ensure that these programs are fully funded. The working group stayed away from the funding mechanisms, but felt very strongly that we needed to make sure that those funding mechanisms existed. So no recommendations, just a recommendation to some of the other working groups.
Yep, that's perfect.
The next platform is on sustainability and traceability. Sustainability, obviously, the consumers are demanding it a lot more than they ever have before. It's becoming a recognized trend in packaged goods, fashion industry. Everywhere we're hearing about farmers and the sustainabilities of our practices. Livestock operations are also are being asked to look at traceability issues on animal ID tags, feeding management, health of animals, robotic operations, and waste management systems. Traceability from a policy perspective, the accurate and timely traceability of products and activities in the supply chain has become a new factor in agribusiness, and we only feel like that will get stronger. A couple of industries that we talked extensively about was the produce industry and the beef industry, especially on the animal ID side of things. And we've got a couple of recommendations from those discussions. The first one is we feel like that special focus on sustainability. There should be additional federal resources devoted to precision ag applications that promote sustainable farming practices throughout the USDA. And on the second point, due to few food safety components of traceability, there should also be federal resources devoted to agricultural traceability technologies and connectivity issues by FDA and USDA. So I'll stop there and answer any questions on those, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, Dr. Adeline?
Yeah. So one part of my question refers back to the one on security and then on the last point that you just made related to security. And let me preface this comment related to my work here at South Dakota State. So we have a crop specialist here at SDSU that looks at crop diseases. And he is connected with folks at Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, North Dakota. And the idea behind it is if he sees, let's say, a wheat disease or a corn disease, he shares that information up and down the line, so we might have an early detection of the possible terrorist incident. I don't think people realize how fast you could disrupt the food security by someone introducing a disease, and in one state you might go, oh, this is only, you know, a couple hundred acres, but all of a sudden it pops up in Texas and in Wyoming and so forth. So one, with your security recommendation and locking it down, I'm a little concerned of what's happened like with HIPAA, in that it's so locked down that the sharing of actual information can't happen. And it becomes a detriment to us with a terrorist activity related to crop sources or even livestock sources. And then on your last point, again, I would include food security in relationship to national security and a terrorist opportunity. So sharing information to spot that is extremely important. So however you would like to note it, again, like I say, on the first one, I'm a little concerned about HIPAA, that we end up with a HIPAA-like recommendation and data can't be shared appropriately. And then the last one, mentioning food security in relationship to the actual food source and a terrorist activity. That's what I have. Very good recommendations.
So Dr. Adeline, would that be something that we could continue to build on in the future with future reports, and let the platform stay here and then me go back to our committee and add your concerns so we could add that to our future documents?
Absolutely.
Good comments. Other questions, comments on the existing recommendation? Okay, you can move on, Mr. McCormick.
And then certainly our group has a broad perspective, and we sometimes talk about things that maybe some of the other working groups could work on a little bit better or focus in on. And we would make a recommendation that in collaboration with examining the current and future connectivity demand working group, that we further policy initiatives for the above recommendations would be discussed. So just a recommendation for that group to look into, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect.
The next bullet point is the next platform we talked about was automation and telemetry. The initial findings show that automation and remote telemetry technology utilized in precision ag will help alleviate labor shortages, enhance sustainability and traceability, and increase efficiencies while driving demands. We've made some recommendations on that coming out of that discussion and that part of our group effort. And the first one is Number one, expand federal programs such as CSP, equip to be more proactive rather than reactive to areas considered high stress only. Two, to reduce the red tape for subsidies. A prohibitive amount of red tape and administrative requirements or disincentive for using them in some other countries or finding ways to get around that. Focus subsidies on outcomes and not solutions. Currently, NRCS subsidies require the use of certain technologies like soil sensors instead of focusing on the desired outcomes. For example, an alternative technology may achieve the same end more efficiently, like measuring the plant's use of water instead of the soil. Ensuring the subsidies are objective focused instead of solution focused will broaden that availability. Fourth, designated test farms. That national test farm sites were highlighted as particularly effective method of increasing producers' awareness and trialing new agricultural technologies. And while the government doesn't typically participate in this type of thing, that this could be easily overcome through USDA and NRCS designation of technology leading producers, like the work that's going on at Nebraska. So those are our recommendations, Mr. Chairman, and I'll take questions or.
Yes, so question, comments on the recommendation around automation and telemetry for the group? Andy Bader.
I really like the comment for recommendation 4. We have a number of programs available to those in sustainable agriculture for grant money to test things. I don't know that we necessarily have that available in other sectors of agriculture, and I think that would be very positive.
I'll give a lot of credit to Julie Bichelle, our vice chair, for working on this jobs side of things. So.
Other questions, comments? Okay, we can move on, Mr. McCormick.
All right, the next platform that was identified by our working group is the role of land-grant universities, extension programs, and community colleges, which should play a big role in the jobs side of our working group's charge. The major topic identified was the success of STEM programs and precision ag tracks offered by land grants, extension, and community colleges. There are dozens of institutions involved in research and real-time development and strategies, and higher education's efforts to prepare our workforce to support the skilled jobs demand caused by precision ag adoption requires a concerted effort. Our task force, after looking into all of the educational programs that's out there, made the following recommendations. That number one, we need to streamline the ability for school districts, local extension agencies, and land grants to further partner with public companies to increase educational opportunities and entrepreneurial programs. Second, we want to encourage state legislatures to increase their funding for STEM programs, K through 12, community colleges. Third, we want to increase access to distant learning, allowing rural citizens to satisfy post-secondary education and college-level degrees, more specifically allowing individuals engaged in farming to stay active in operations while achieving their educational goals. And last, to develop a robust program track for ag tech IT security specialists. Mr. Chairman, I'll take comments or questions.
Any questions or comments? Dr. Adeline?
So, Mike, I thought maybe a mention of FFA and 4-H within this context and using that vehicle in the education of their dads could be, or moms might be quite useful. So I would encourage you to see where it might fit into your thoughts related to that. I think those two organizations would be helpful.
I think we're going to come to them here in just a little bit, Dr. Adeline, but
Yeah, Dr. Adeline, those are mentioned specifically by name as well as the AFA a little bit later in the document and given as specific examples.
Very good. Thank you.
Would you like me to move on, Mr. Chairman? Would you like me to move?
Teddy, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Teddy.
I muted myself after I was muted. Sorry about that. Now, the one comment I would say on this one is I think this set of recommendations is an important one. You know, there's a lot of fear with automation and telemetry that jobs are going to get eliminated. But I do think that there's a whole set of jobs in ag technology, in security, and even the operation of some of these software, no longer equipment, that's coming, and that's one thing that precision agriculture can offer, and it's a richer job. So I think this is something really worth mentioning, and encouraging folks to think about it and create programs. So I commend the group for making recommendations.
Yes, sir, I agree. I think this is one of the most important things that come out of our working group, specifically about what Dr. Adeline's talking about, that we'll cover in the next section.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one.
All right, the next platform is the need for career and technical education and apprenticeships, with the demand for skilled jobs that we expect to increase. The adoption of precision ag, career technical education and apprenticeship programs provide an avenue to rapidly fill this demand while providing hands-on training for skilled workforce. We get into the 4-H side of things, the FFA, and the other ag apprenticeship programs that could possibly be out there. And the group made the recommendation that we wanted to expand the model exemplified by Pennsylvania to further expand the ag tech careers at state and local levels. The second one is to further fund programs such as Ag Futures of America, FFA, and 4-H through partnerships with USDA and public agencies. We feel that that's critical to the getting the younger generation involved in this and on this track. Third, we want to promote the Department of Labor's industry recognized apprenticeship programs across associations and organizations with agricultural space in order to expedite the commencement of this program. And fourth, federal, state, and local funding should be established for an ag tech IT security specialist program track.
Okay. Any questions or comments, Dr. Adeline?
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think this gives us an opportunity, and I really appreciate these recommendations, to reach out to the more urban communities and to those. I mean, we have to understand population, and we're going to need to reach out to them for people to fill some of these jobs. And this gives us that bridge. So thank you.
Dr. Adeline, I'd like to kind of comment. One of the programs we run here in Texas is we have Texas Workforce Commission, and they're very adept at promoting jobs in the oil and gas industry. But when talking with the Workforce Commission about the things that we need in agriculture, they've taken up quite an interest in promoting the educational side for the technology and the techs that are going to be needed for precision ag. So that may be something that would fit into other states also.
Comments? Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's move on.
All right, Mr. Chairman, the last platform I think we'll talk about is our COVID-19 broadband availability and connectivity, which was just a broad topic that we added at the end when COVID-19 was beginning to change our world. And I don't know that we ever see another normal. I think we will always have some type of hybrid that that COVID-19 will have exposed, and we felt like that this part of this, it not only affects us on our farm, but our families as well, of whether we're teaching them at home or telemedicine at home in rural communities, that this is a big part of our conversation of connectivity. So the report that our committee put together just said COVID-19's changed our world. It's aimed a spotlight on the usefulness of broadband to support education, healthcare, telework, and other industries that's related to agriculture. Without on-farm connectivity, it's impossible to track goods through our supply chain during high times of demand that's been caused by this pandemic. The economic development side of this says that broadband plays a critical role in supporting both on-site and telework opportunities for rural regions. Not only do farmers want to farm, they want to have opportunities for their family to be able to find jobs in the rural communities that we're living in. Educational needs of those farmers and their families is certainly of high demand to the people that are living in rural areas, and the promise of rural broadband and meeting those future educational needs can be seen through the actual performance that broadband providers have established in the past few months. Healthcare, obviously, with an older generation that are in the rural communities, they face higher rates of chronic and acute illnesses, and the distance from the specialist and are factors, and access to affordable health care in rural areas can be difficult. There's a lot of discussion, but in the end, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation is that FCC and USDA should consider precision agricultural connectivity as an imperative driver of our nation's food security.
And Dr. Adeline, we believe that this also touches on your previous comment about food security.
I agree. Thank you.
Dan has a question or comment.
Yeah, just reiterating what you just said. I think that's come through across each of the three. It's one of the big elements that we have, and it's one of the big missions of this task force to get solved. So.
Okay, so Mr. McCormick, very nice job walking through the document, the recommendation, and some of the input there. Any big questions, comments on the overall report from the task force?
And Mr. Chairman, I believe Julie Bichelle has changed those little bit of wording changes in those recommendations already, so they should be up, and that we're good with those.
Yeah, absolutely. The document has all the updated changes. So, and that was the one that was sent out last night. So I'm not seeing any questions or comments. Maybe I'll give it a few seconds if anybody else wants to raise their hand. Okay, I don't see any hands going up. So if so, I want to entertain a motion to be able to approve the recommendations on report.
Mr. Chairman, I so move.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Dan.
And second, thank you. So as far as approval, we're going to do it a little bit differently. So we need approval from the team one by one. So what I'm going to have is Jesse Jackman going to call out our names, and you can see whether you approve, you disapprove, or you abstain from voting. So Jesse, I'll turn it over to you. Oh.
Hey, thanks, Teddy. Just make sure everybody's on mute so not getting feedback. Thank you. I will go start with the task force members, and I'll go to the vice chair and then the chair. Does that work, Teddy?
That sounds good.
All right. Dr. Michael Adeline?
Approve.
Seth Arndorfer?
Approve.
The Honorable Dale Artho?
Approved.
Peter Brent?
Approve.
Christian?
Approved.
Anthony Dillard?
Approve.
David Goldman?
Approved.
Michael Gomes?
Approved.
Daniel Lipfried,
Approved.
Mike McCormick,
Approved.
Jeff Pettit,
Approved.
Steve Vale,
Approve.
Catherine Moyer,
Approve.
and finally Teddy Kelly.
Approved. Okay, I believe that was everyone. So the report passes. Very nice job from the working group. I know there's a lot of work that went into it. Mr. McCormick, please pass our thanks to the rest of the group and to Julie Bushell. I think there was a lot that went in there and very exciting. Andy Bader, you have a comment to make?
Just very quickly, I didn't hear my name, but I approved it.
Oh, yes. Jack,
Oh, Andy Bader, I did. Sorry, I did skip right over you. Thank you for saying that. That was not intentional. I apologize.
Okay. So again, that's really great work there. Really quickly, I wanted to check with Dan Leifried. Are we in a position to review some of the changes to the connectivity needs working group, or should we do it after lunch? Either way is totally fine.
We are in a position to do it before lunch if you want to. I've sent it to all of the members via email, and I've got notes of which changes were made if we need to review it publicly, which I'm fine with.
Yeah, so I think if that's the position we're in, let's go ahead and do that now. Is there something we can put up on the screen to share? Yeah, great.
I'm gonna try if I can find the application that I'm looking for. If you give me 1 second, please.
Absolutely.
Try again. All right, I'm going to do my best from memory of where the changes were. Updated the table of contents just in order to reflect any of the changes. I wouldn't consider that anything material. Page, I believe it's 17 I'm going to go to next. If somebody could be double checking me against the email that I sent just in order for completeness, I would appreciate it.
Sounds good.
Page 17. Trying to remember, I think it's the last paragraph. First sentence of the last paragraph. Currently, the FCC defines, I modified and changed it from broadband to advanced telecommunications capability per technical request. Change 1.
Okay. Yep.
Change 2, I believe, is on the spectrum area, and it's maybe noted later, but I'm just going to highlight it again. The last statement on page 19, we urge the deployment working group was moved to recommend, was also copied into the last section, recommendations for other working groups.
Okay.
Teddy, prompt me to where the next change is. I think it's in the actual recommendations.
Right, page 27, recommendation 2.
Thank you. Right here. Okay. The changes to this per Dave Goldman, changed the second line from providers for 5G to high speed, low latency, mobile. I did not include the dashes as you suggested, David, but I hope that's not material.
I'm okay with that, thanks.
Okay. I noticed it after I had finished it, and I didn't want to go back through for that. So change that. Also, at the end of that, back to the closed loop accountability. So the last statement was added with incentives and subsidies programs highlighted in recommendations 1 and 2. There should be a closed loop audit process to ensure that the proposals that were awarded funding are implemented and meet the objectives stated in the proposal. Michael Adeline, I think that might have been at least your concern. Does that cover?
Yes.
Appropriately? Thank you.
That's good. Thanks, Daniel.
No problem. And then Teddy, remind me, I think it's recommendation 3. I just want to make sure I've got 2 covered.
That's exactly right. Recommendation 3.
Recommendation 3, I left the statement around that as was written. What I did was add particular focus should be placed on increasing the upload speeds to meet the evolving demands of precision agriculture data creation and utilization for improved value. Perfect symmetry of the download and upload are not the goal, but rather driving increased capacity of the bandwidth both directions to meet new demands. If there's suggested edits for that, I can remake those. I was just trying to go with what I had heard from compelling feedback.
Any questions from the group or comments on that one?
This is David Goldman. I was just going to say, I thought you did a nice job with that. So it looks good to me.
Thanks, David. And then I believe the last change, Teddy, is in the recommendations to other groups back to my earlier note. Is that correct?
That's right. Page 29, item G.
Thank you. Page 29, item G was a carryover from the spectrum section. We urged the deployment working group to move forward with analyzing the spectrum requirements to support terrestrial and non-terrestrial precision ag deployment and connectivity. I know we're not voting on that, but I wanted to ensure that everyone knew for completeness.
Perfect. I believe you covered all the changes that were highlighted.
Were there, and I'd ask just in case there's anything else outstanding, were there any other recommendations for changes that I did miss? I believe I captured decent notes, but I want to make sure.
Right? Like, I don't know. It just feels like very tight.
I think this is Jesse.
Dan, I'm not seeing any hands raised, or I'm not hearing any comments.
Hello?
Jesse, can you hear me all right?
Hey, yeah, I can hear you guys.
Did I cover the technical change that you requested?
Yes, yeah, you did cover the technical change. The one thing I was going to mention is if the part where you are recommending, or the group is recommending for the other working group to look at spectrum, you've moved that to the recommendation for the working group section. But if it's still in the text, would it be okay just to take it out of the main document so it's just below? So that way it's clear that it's not something part of the task force is voting on. I think if it's in the main document, that it looks like it's part of the vote, because the vote is in all the report as well.
Okay, yeah, so I think the recommendation, just to summarize, Jesse, is to remove it from the main body on the spectrum section at the end in order to have the body be votable, we'll call it. Is that a fair statement? I can
exactly.
remove that. If that's the only piece, I will remove that as a next step and submit the report with that change and that change only.
Thank you.
Teddy, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yep, so it looks like that there's no other hands or comments there. We can move that one sentence, which has already been moved, so it's just striking it from the main body. So with that in mind, I think we can go ahead and move to a vote for the recommendations and the documents on the connectivity needs. Do I have a motion for approving the document and the recommendations?
I move to approve.
There, I think we got it in a second.
I'll second it. This is Dale.
Second. Thank you. So we'll do the same thing as far as the voting is concerned for approval, disapproval, or abstain. Which way you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and get that started again. Dr. Michael Adelon.
Approved.
Seth Arndorfer.
Approved.
The Honorable Dale Artho.
Approved.
Andy Bader.
Approved.
Peter Brent.
Approved.
Chris Chin.
Approved.
Anthony Dillard.
Approve.
David Goldman.
Approved.
Michael Gomes.
Approve.
Daniel Lidry,
Approve.
Mike McCormick,
Approve.
Jeff Pettit,
Approved.
Steve Vale,
Approve.
Catherine Moyer,
Approve.
Teddy Buchanan.
Approved. Okay, so it looks like we have approval of the document unanimously from the task force. That's really good. Again, Dan, really nice work from the working group there. Please go back to the working group and thank them for all the work they put into this. I thought it was a robust document, so very exciting. So with that, Chi, we have approved all the reports. What we'll do is we'll break for lunch now, and then when we come back, Jeff Pettit can give us just a quick update on sort of the accelerating broadband working group and some of the efforts there. I believe we're in really good shape for the day, and we should be able to end early. So with that, we will break now. It's 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. And we'll come back together in about 1 hour from now. So that will be 1:30 p.m. Eastern and 12:30 p.m. Central. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. We're in the latter half of the Precision Ag Connectivity working task force. Like as we did in the morning, we went through all the reports that were submitted. Those were all the ones that we had to approve. So we got through the approvals. I really appreciate everybody's efficiency in that. Now that gives us time for some other updates and additional discussions, which I'm pretty excited about. I think we have some good materials to cover here in the next hour and a half potentially. But before we do that, the Accelerating Broadband Working Group, there was no document submitted at this point in time. They collaborated with the Connectivity Needs Working Group for the report this time around. However, I would still like to have Jeff Pettit, if possible, give us an update on the discussions that have been occurring and the work that's been occurring with the working group. It's also a little bit of a discussion about next steps for that working group. As we've seen, a lot of the other working groups also had several recommendations and suggestions for this working group. So I think the team definitely has the work cut out for them, but it's pretty exciting. So with that, Jeff, maybe I'll turn it over to you for kind of a quick update.
Thank you, Teddy. Appreciate the opportunity to share with everyone. Just so you'll know, we have been meeting, we have been busy. This working group has been on a call every other week since we started, looking at the different aspects that would be connected to deploying broadband further into rural areas in the United States. We have also looked at the reports, the preliminary reports that have been submitted over the past couple of weeks by the other three working groups. We will now be taking those once they are approved or have been approved and further digging down into those to see from a deployment aspect, how can we help to deploy broadband, whether that's through infrastructure updates or the conduits or whatever means are needed to get the broadband out to the last acre. And, I think that's been a reoccurring theme that I have heard today is, getting the last acre, the last mile, whatever terminology we want to use, how do we get service out there? So with what's been presented today, that gives us more of a target to shoot at, to focus our efforts on. And we will definitely be taking those up in the next few days or the next weeks and drilling down into each of those and the recommendations from each of those reports back to our committee, as well as, looking at, I guess, policy a little bit, Teddy. We've got to figure out from a policy perspective, what are barriers that might hinder a rapid deployment or an accelerated deployment once we know where we're going? What are the targeted areas we need to hit? What is the technology that we need to get there? And one thing we've been very cognizant of in our conversations is, we can go out and deploy infrastructure today to get broadband to these areas that maybe are not being served currently. The problem is what we might install today is old technology really by the time it gets deployed. And would it serve the needs 5 years from now or 10 years from now? You know, and how do we take what we're looking at as far as infrastructure, conduits, and make it expandable, sustainable, you know, for years to come as these last acres and last miles are going to demand, you know, more service. So I think that's all a big part of the conversation that we've got to look at going forward. You know, this is an ever-changing target, so to speak, as far as the technologies that are going to be needed in the fields, whether it's on the combines, whether it's back at the home office, whether it's a module strapped to a cow's tail, whatever it may be, you know, and how do we adequately cover those in the areas that aren't being covered now. You know, we've got primarily three conduits in my mind that we're currently using, and I've not really seen anything that changes that greatly. You know, it's either going to be wireless, it's going to be satellite, or it's going to be fiber. Primarily is how do we get service out to these areas, you know. So in my mind, when you look at those, what has to happen for the future needs to be able to get the service out to those last acres that we want to serve. But also serving on our working group, we've got Steve Vale, who's very well versed in building out some of those systems in different parts of the country. Anthony has been involved as well as David Goldman. So if any of those gentlemen would like to interject something at this time about our discussions about what we've looked at, I'd like to give them that opportunity.
Thank you, Jeff. Steve, Anthony, any comments?
Teddy, I'll go ahead and just give a quick thought. We do have a lot of our discussions are very much aligned kind of with all the other things that we've heard today. So I feel that we're on a good path to, as Jeff said, part of our challenge was trying to hear kind of the path or the direction some of the other groups were going so we could really focus on how do we accelerate those efforts. And so again, today and the reports have done a real good job in giving us kind of that pathway. And we have a lot of working recommendations, language and stuff that we have a document that we've been working on. So we've got a good start on that. We can kind of massage those a little bit based upon what we've heard today, and really appreciate also the clarity provided to us from the other working groups on some things that they think we can work on. So that'll be very helpful also.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Dan has a comment or question.
Yeah, thanks, Teddy. To Jeff and the team on deployment, you know, I think we can discuss this more in kind of new business or open time towards the end, but it might be beneficial to us collectively as a task force to consider cross-pollinating some of the members from the individual working groups on the first reports that came out today into the deployment. It's not that the group isn't well suited to drive recommendations, but that way we get the best level of continuity and kind of intent of what kind of the flow of this is. Again, something we can discuss later, but I wanted to plant that seed.
Dan, I would agree with that. In listening to some of the reports today and some comments that were made, I think it would be very helpful to incorporate some of that in our process going forward.
Good comment. David Goldman.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, you're on mute again, David. You were off and then back on mute. Okay.
Oh, I think I finally, sorry, I was struggling with the mute was not turning off on me. I think maybe my phone may have been sending me a message. So yeah, I just want to follow up that, yeah, I think one of the things that our group in general struggled with, I shouldn't say struggled, but it felt a little bit like a chicken and egg problem for us on this, is that it was hard to know which technologies, which solutions on deployment made sense until we got some more feedback from the other working groups. I think exactly what Dan said makes a ton of sense to me. Of can we then take what was done today and feed it back in? Because I think, you know, each different technology that's out there has trade-offs. It has strengths and it has weaknesses. Speed of deployment, cost, speed, you know, the actual throughput that you're delivering. And so helping us understand, you know, what are we trying to accomplish in the near term, midterm, and long term, and what are the costs associated with it, I think will help us then develop specific recommendations to address specifically what was adopted today. So I think Dan's point makes a lot of sense, and I think just today's reports in general will help be able to help feed the working group and be able to get us to more specific recommendations going forward.
Thank you, David. Other comments from that members from that working group?
Teddy, this is Anthony. I don't know that there's a lot more that I could expand on that they've already mentioned. So I'm gonna go with what they've already covered and covered it really well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Okay, so any questions or comments for this working group? Okay, I don't see any hands up or any comments. So with that, one of the things that you know, we didn't know if we're going to have time to do was that review some presentations that were prepared by some of the working groups. So specifically, the Connectivity Demands Working Group had a really nice presentation on precision agriculture. One of the things we wanted to do today was make sure we got through the reports and the recommendations. We did that, and now we have actually the time to be able to look at some of the information to be shared. So with that, Dan and the team have a really good presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to him to kind of cover some of the insights from this working group. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Teddy. So maybe a few opening comments. Number one, I want to ensure that I ask for support to include Andy Bader's opening statement officially in the record. I know that he submitted his notes and his documents, so I'd ask for that to be included. I'd also ask, if there's no objection at the end of this, that this be included in the record. I've tried to modify just slightly the report to match what the intent of the presentation to match the intent of some of the changes that we made. And if you see errors, please let me know. We believe, again, as a collective team, that this is a bigger problem than just connectivity, although connectivity is at the foundation of it. So I'm going to walk through this quickly. I want to pay special attention to this first one because it'd be an understatement to say that the team on the right hasn't done a lot of work to help us collectively as a task force to get to where we're at. And I really appreciate their perspectives, their participation, their diverse thoughts in how we solve this problem. Try to get it to advance. This first slide was a little bit of a summary of Andy Bader's, so I won't walk through it. But again, at a high level, we believe that there are three major elements to solve for when it comes to precision ag, and that's food security, environmental sustainability, and economic viability of the producers themselves. We believe that this is a growing problem that will only get worse over time, so action is necessary, and we need to be bold and broad in our thinking of how to get there. The group also put together a few publicly available presentations or videos, and I'll see if they work. If they don't work, they'll be included in the actual publicly available deck, but this is not an endorsement of any one company, but it helps paint a picture of broadband's importance, some of the current practices of farming with IoT, and a vision for the future. And as is stated at the bottom, they're interesting and compelling, but they're all reliant upon infrastructure, whether it's 5G or a high-speed, low-latency connectivity system, and applications to make them possible. So I'm going to try to see if I can get it to play. If not, let me know.
Is it running on your computer, Dan? Because I don't think we're seeing it on this share.
It is.
Hey.
That's why.
Hey, Dan. So I've told you actually you need to mute your video.
I'm listening.
Not quite following.
Okay, so no sound.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
one thing you can do.
Try muting yourself, and I did.
Mute myself, okay, and then try
to share the screen.
Yeah, and when you share the screen, Dan, there's a little button that says include computer sound. That's a toggle right before you share. So you might want to unshare now, and then when you reshare again, there's when you say share desktop or the application, there's a little toggle that says include computer sound. See if that does the trick.
Yeah, I might refer to the chat as well.
Can you hear that?
No, we don't hear the sound. You see it?
Yeah.
You might unplug your earphones if you've got them. That might do it. That's done it before.
I'm just going to forego it and allow the public to review the videos offline. I apologize for the error. I know it was compelling, but can you hear me, Teddy? I just want to ensure that you can still hear me. I'm going to reshare my presentation if I possibly can, and then we'll keep going. So again, I think that the actual YouTube links allow you to see the case for change here and why this is so compelling. Again, all built upon reliant infrastructure, 5G wireless or wireless, high speed, low latency, highly reliable connectivity and agricultural apps to make it possible. Maybe just going a little deeper on that, we've tried to outlay kind of a framework to tell this story around precision technology, is built upon the foundation of cloud, artificial intelligence going forward, the applications to take advantage of both of those. And we believe that they have a strong linkage to supporting sustainable agricultural practices that are not only good for the environment, but good for the economics of the actual industry as well. Collectively, we refer to these things as automation. Application and automation obviously requires millions of sensors, cameras and machine vision, controls and devices, and collectively these devices rely upon connectivity. Again, taking that same feed down one layer deeper, those devices require connectivity to the cloud, to each other in real time. They must be reliable with low latency or no latency in some cases when it comes to full autonomy. And we know that it's not just one single technology, it's both wired and wireless collectively to drive connectivity. And this infrastructure ultimately is made up of high-speed communication, edge computing systems, and we believe that there's going to be a broader move towards private clouds on the farm in order to take advantage of this technology. Maybe in summary, this is probably the punchline slide around the last two. Precision agriculture requires precision technology. That technology relies upon infrastructure at the farm, both large and small. That infrastructure requires both edge compute and private networks, and both public 4G, 5G, and other types of connectivity networks must cover the farm fields and pasture lands, back to our point from earlier. The ultimate conclusion is broadband to the farm is a bridge halfway, an important one, but only a bridge halfway. The actions to address these challenges are time sensitive. And as Andy Bader appropriately noted in this morning's discussion, we believe that it requires an integrated initiative, not just one focused on connectivity or programs, but one that's integrated in order to drive us forward as an industry. And then a summary of our recommendations. Again, I tried to make slight modifications to match the approved language that we went with this morning, accelerating uplink speed to match or exceed downlinks. The downlink standard was one of those modifications. And so this is just, again, a summary of what was in the report. And then finally, you see on this next slide, our overall next steps and actions, which we outlined in the report as well. So I just wanted to get this included in the record if at all possible. The team did a great job trying to condense a 30-page document down into 5 or 6 slides to drive both a sense of urgency and understanding that this is a big problem and a big picture approach to solving it, and that we all must work together to act. Any questions?
It's a great presentation. Any questions for Dan and the other members of that working group? Seth?
Yeah, I would like to get some clarification on the definition of private 5G networks. I think I understand what you're saying, but in my mind, there's public. Maybe that would be federal, public and private, some public-private partnerships. But I think in this case, you're talking more private as, is Verizon private as in private industry, or private as in the farmer has his own 5G? And I think maybe we should clarify that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Seth. I think in this context, I think that there's multiple ways to solve that. I think we are saying, though, that the farmer or the producer, may need to install private 5G or private LTE systems themselves. That's the context more so than private companies versus the government.
Dale?
Can you clarify just a little bit more about what you're talking about, coordination and more work between different groups? I assume that's out within, it's internal within this group, but it's also going to involve some other people. Could you elaborate on that just a bit?
Yeah, Dale, I think in the context here, as we look at it, this task force was kicked off with a clear mandate of trying to drive accelerated technology, in particular around connectivity or communications to cover agriculture, right? As was stated in even some of the adoption and jobs reports and in the other areas this morning, the reality is sometimes we take fragmented approaches that don't integrate the best of all. So what can the USDA do to drive precision ag adoption? What can the FCC do to drive the connectivity? What can the other agencies, both federal and state, do together in order to ensure that we've got a sustainable food supply built on sustainable environmental practices, built on sustainable economics for agriculture? And I don't know if I actually have the exact answer to how to do that, but we want to elevate the discussion at least beyond this task force over time to say these can't be fragmented efforts if we're actually going to get there. And Andy Bader, you again, back to your opening comments, you may have some perspective you want to add as well.
Thanks, Dan. One of the things that I learned during the research that we did this year, that there are times where standards are lacking or where data that's currently being transcribed manually is now being collected automatically through automation and is no longer being collected in an aggregate fashion. So that's an example of the kind of coordination that we need cross-industry not just at the government level, but between farmers and their technology providers, farmers and universities, et cetera. It's that standards work, it's the interoperability work, which we heard about this morning, but it's really dramatic when you start talking to learned people in each of these sectors. And I was focused with Dr. Chandra on the animal agriculture section. It's shocking, actually, when you will ask a question, you will hear it's not been figured out, or no, we don't really have a good mechanism to collect herd data from all the robots that are in dairy barns now, where we used to do that manually through DHIA. It's astonishing, and I think it's the kind of thing that we really need to highlight as a detail, but also to show the magnitude of the problem.
Any other questions or comments?
Nothing more to add from my perspective, Teddy. Thank you very much for allowing the time, and I hope everyone gets a chance to digest some of the perspective in the videos as it's made available.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dan, for sharing that. We'll make sure that the document is available to the public, as well as because some of the videos are inside the PowerPoint. What we could do, and we can work with Jesse offline to get the link to those videos and publish those with the document, so people can get to the link and look at those videos. So I think it's important, and it does bring to life why this is important and the impact it can have to the food security piece you mentioned earlier.
Perfect, thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands going up on this specific topic, so we'll move on. The next piece is just really open business and other discussion. Is there anything from anybody on the task force that you'd want to bring up to for overall discussion? Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just go back to my earlier comment. I'd love to have an open discussion in whatever order it is around how do we take the work from the first year, the mandates that are still left open over the course of the next year, and figure out a method and a mechanism to drive the team to work together towards a cohesive outcome versus 4 reports a year from now. I don't believe that I have the silver bullet on that, but I don't believe 4 independent groups working and hoping that it all comes together is going to get us to where we need to be.
I'll give you my my thoughts, and obviously this is something we'll have to construct over the next 365 days. But you're absolutely right. It can't read like 4 reports. What it has to do is like read like 1 document, but 4 sections or 4 modules, something like that, right? And so, it's great that folks identified, for example, that this other working group should look at the following recommendation. So, in the final one, I don't expect to see something like that. It should be more of that recommendation is within that module that we talked about earlier. So to your point, this idea of a cross-pollination makes a lot of sense, right? I think for the most part, when we look at kind of informing ourselves, learning, we've done quite a bit of that in the first year. And so really the second year now is really flushing the details of those pieces, and flushing that out means potentially not sticking to our lanes within the working groups, but starting to collide working groups, maybe even around the recommendations and not necessarily around the working group itself. So there's quite a bit of coordination that we'll have to do. And my thought process, and I'm open to how the group wants to go about this, but the first 6 months is merely trying to get that coordination. And then the latter 6 months is really putting together the final recommendations almost as one unit. So, which may require more discussion amongst this team as well. Andy, I know you had your hand up, and then David.
Yeah, thank you. So my participation in this work group was as Andy Bader, individual farmer. But I do wear other hats, as some of us do. And I work in advocacy here in Pennsylvania, and I work with legislators, and I'm in a cycle of that now. And so I'm I guess I'm asking a little bit for the rules of the road or some direction. Now, this has been a public meeting and these reports are now public. And there are some directions that we can take this effort that will require funding and support. And so I'm wondering how that occurs. And in particular, I wonder, what I'm allowed to do or say within the construct of my being a participant of this task force.
That's a good question, and there's a couple of questions in there, I think. So from a procedural perspective, maybe I don't know if anybody from the FCC has an opinion on that, or the USDA.
Okay, this is Jesse. Andy, if I understand the question, well, so as the task force, right, you represent your farm, you come from the small, representing small farmers. But are you thinking that, and I think you kind of announced, if I recall, you did announce any conflicts that you had, but I mean, when you're coming at this task force, you are representing your farm in this instance. Definitely you bring the knowledge that you gain from other areas and other committees or groups that you're on. But specifically, you're kind of representing you or specifically your farm while you're on the task force.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but if you,
I guess
kind of a high level.
Yeah, to be candid, if that's where I need to stop, then a lot of stuff that's potentially beneficial to society as a whole will drop on the floor because I'm not allowed to talk about it with people I'm connected with.
I mean, I think, let me take some of this back, but, generally, all these meetings are public. You say when the working group, when what's going on in the working group and those collaborations, those are confidential, and then those are all brought up to the task force. And, under our Federal Advisory Committee rules and regulations, that the task force meetings, when we get the whole task force together, those meetings are open to the public, and the task force members are representing that particular entity on the task force. But yeah, Andy, I think, maybe we can have a conversation offline about this and get some more guidance for you in terms of if you're concerned about any conflicts of interests or kind of the overlap between your work here on the task force and representation and maybe some of the groups or committees you're on in other areas as well.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and Jesse, let me maybe ask even the question in a different way. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of time spent, learning about sort of what's happening in the space, different technologies, different, et cetera. And we're going to continue to define our thought process, our findings, and recommendations. However, we did submit 3 documents, approve them today, right? So as task force members, are the folks on this task force able to talk about the things we just voted on and said, if somebody asked the question, what is your task force up to? Can they say, okay, here are the 3 documents we voted on, and here's the preliminary recommendations that came forward?
Yes, in terms of things that are now out there publicly, yes, you can talk about those. And these reports in particular, now the task force has a collective voice or collective reports or ideas that they have voted on. So you can now talk to these things and say, these are the opinions of the task force. So yes, you can say that. And when if you're speaking to other people or you're giving, speaking publicly or on other committees, you can speak to these documents as something that, yes, these are things that the task force has said. These are things that the task force has agreed upon. Anything that's your own opinion, same that we said before, is that you say, this is my own opinion. I know we had task force members participate in a panel discussion, I think it was back in June, and this was before the task force had actually adopted anything collectively. So we were very clear to say, anything you're talking about here, this is your own opinion. But now you can say that there are things that the task force has said, but you want to make sure that they are things that the task force has said and agreed upon collectively. and not to make a representation of something that the task force has agreed upon if that's not actually the case. So that's what we have to be careful about going forward.
Yeah. And Andy, to answer the second part of the question now, I think, so obviously anything that's we voted on, it's public now, we can talk about that as a sort of, this is what came from the task force. Now, what we'll continue to do, and to your question on funding or other recommendations we make, that's what we'll have to tighten up, you know, so that when the next round comes through, we have some recommendations, and then once those gets published, then we can talk about those recommendations as well. So hopefully that helps a little bit to your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. David Goldman.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah,
yes,
great. Thanks. So one of the things I was noticing, this is kind of I guess a substantive thing. One of the things I was noticing from a couple of the reports, there's a lot of reliance that there's gonna be subsidies, and there's a lot of questions of like, what do we do with the subsidies? How do we shape the subsidies? Should we have more? And I'm just wondering, as we move forward, should we be also thinking about, I'm always reluctant to recommend policies that depend on Congress finding money for me. You know, it's always, I'm not sure that money is going to be flowing. You know, we looked this year, there was a lot of talk in Congress about different kind of broadband subsidy programs that never really came to be. And I'm just wondering, as we look ahead for all the groups, should we be kind of building in a contingency? What if there is no money coming from Congress? What if there is no money coming from the FCC for the things we're doing? What do we do then? And I am sad. I'm fine if the answer is we don't really have an answer then, but I just am wondering whether that's something we should be thinking about.
David, I think that's a good point, and that's something that probably needs to, we'll have to think through that. Now, one thing I've learned in the last 2 months is if we get specific about a mechanism or a funding mechanism or some way of recommending to either an agency or or to legislature that XYZ needs to happen, if it's directly related to precision agriculture and the adoption, the connectivity needs, the mapping, et cetera, I think we can get into the details of that and make recommendations. If it's a broader recommendation, meaning like it's beyond precision agriculture and it's around connectivity as a whole for everyone, for every citizen of the United States, then our recommendation needs to stay broad. We can't get into the details of that. At least that was what I've learned in the last 2 months. And so as we work on our continued documents and recommendations, we'll have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think what I was asking is a little bit different than that. Is rather than suggesting what a subsidy program should look like or what the funding should look like, more actually the alternative, which is what if nothing passes, and do we have a plan? How do we make sure that we're still getting service and we're increasing connectivity to agricultural lands, even if there's not more money coming?
Got you. No, I think that's a fair comment. That would be something we take back to the the working groups will have to work through that, and then as a whole discuss that. So,
thanks.
Yeah, Dr. Adeline.
So building on David's comment, one model might be if you look at Internet 2, right, and how higher ed built out that research network across the United States. And then I would give you an example within that. South Dakota is part of the northern tier. And if you look at the research network across the United States, it went through the middle of the country, it went through the southern states. But basically from Minnesota over to Washington, including the Dakotas, there wasn't that connectivity. And we got together, created the northern tier, and basically have state networks that all interconnect. So there are a couple models out there to drive some connectivity that if funding wasn't initially available, and maybe it's a pilot approach, showing how it could be done, certainly some dialogue can happen in that way.
That's a very good point. as you're mentioning that, one thing that came to mind to me as well is even if the request is not for funding, as part of a different model, there could be requests around either changes to legislation or new legislation. So if that's the case, then again, we'll have to take that into account as well. Other comments, questions, topics that we should be discussing? Yes, I think Jeff, you have a question? Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, Teddy, I think going back to the initial conversation that either you or Dan brought up about how we get these working groups working together, I guess one of my initial thoughts, of course, I've got to speak with Heather on our group and the rest of the members, but what I would like to see is our working group, start out by reviewing each of these reports that were submitted today. I would like to invite the working group chairs and vice chairs to join us in those meetings when we do that. So if there are questions that my group has that I don't have the answer to, or a different perspective that, might not be in writing, we can have that fluid conversation back and forth while we're discussing that. And then, kindly work through that document and see how it applies to, our work. So I guess for me, that's a suggestion as how we begin that process for my group.
Yep, Jeff, that's a perfect place to start. And I think chair, vice chair, or even the maybe the subject matter expert on that working group that was working on that specific recommendation for another team, bring whoever is required, right, who's sort of the right person into that task force meeting to be able to review that. I think that would be great. And actually, that goes to the point that I had written down that I was going to bring up. So obviously, I look at these reports like almost like midterm, right? So we've sort of halfway through. We submitted them. We have some preliminary recommendations, some of the insights from them, the investigation, and some of the findings from what the team has done. So obviously, the next piece is to continue the meetings. So I encourage you guys to continue to have meetings with your working groups. And this is the cross-pollination that we're talking about now. And a perfect place to start to do the cross-pollination is to, within your working group, review the documents that were submitted from another working group, and potentially, if there's a recommendation in there for your group, is to invite the other working group and the subject matter experts from that group into your meeting, starting a little bit of that cross-pollination. I think that's a perfect place to go, and then we'll continue to shape these reports as we go forward. And there's obviously still things we're going to learn throughout the process and continue to add to our findings, but like I said, starting to make them feel more like one is probably the right approach to go. And so I expect that the chairs and the vice chairs and myself and Catherine will probably have more frequent meetings to make sure that continues to occur, and that we have a framework in place for that. Yeah. So any comments or questions on that from the team?
No comment, Teddy. Agree completely.
Okay. Great. And then the other piece is obviously, one of the things I learned, like I said, over the last 2 months is, as we make recommendations, we have to clearly make sure we look at the charge for the working group and the overall task force. And again, when we make recommendations or things like that, we still have to stay within that charge or the charge of the other working group. And if it belongs to another working group, obviously we make sure that it finds a home there. Also, if we're making more recommendations around kind of broader, like we can't do certain things in precision agriculture because we have this lack, we can still make those types of recommendations, but they'll have to be a little bit broader and not specific if it doesn't pertain specifically to precision ag. I think we did a wonderful job with the team getting to this spot. There was a little bit of bumpiness there, but I think we're really the teams have gotten us in a really good place. So that's what I had. I know, Jesse, you probably have some future dates for us as far as meetings are concerned.
Yes, I do. Some tentative dates that I'm trying to get straightened down here that I have on hold for next year. February 9th, February 10th, July 8th, November 9th, November 10th. So these are tentative. We're not exactly sure if we can have these, but I'll update you as soon as I can. Of course, if we can do that in person, we will look to do that. But I think these virtual meetings have been going well, so that could be doing that as well. Also, in just having the conversation today, I realize as we kind of get to the end of this 2-year term, the task force, there might be a need for additional meetings where the entire task force is getting together. And we don't need to have meetings where they're all day. We could do an hour, we could do 2 hours, where at least we're having everybody together again. We will have to comply with the Federal Advisory Committee rules. Those meetings will have to be public. They'll have to be announced in the Federal Register. So there kind of are some logistical things that we'll have to satisfy before we can even have a meeting. But it sounds like it could be beneficial and worthwhile. And again, these meetings don't have to be an entire day. We could schedule something for an hour. We could schedule something for 2 hours. It just have to be public, and we'd have to go through all the same procedures for our regular meetings that we have had so far. But we can all kind of talk about that later, if that's going to be worthwhile, especially kind of as we get towards the end and we talk about bringing the groups together. Again, we've seen kind of in this task force that there really is a lot of overlap in these working groups. So it looks like it will make sense to maybe have those additional meetings.
Catherine has a comment.
Hey, Teddy, sorry, you kind of broke up, at least on my end, on those November dates. You had February 9th or 10th, July 8th, and November 9th or 10th?
Right. Again, I mean, yeah, especially the one in November, it's pretty far out. So, we have maybe have some flexibility there, but I've learned that it's best to get at least the commission meeting room on hold as soon as we can.
Okay. That's good. Yes. And Jesse, I agree. I think as we get to the latter part of the, closer to that November date, kind of learning from this past year, we probably need to have more frequent meetings. Now, I don't know if it's the whole task force or just the chairs and the vice chairs. We can assess that as we go, but having more frequent meetings as we get closer to the end, I think makes a lot more sense and helps us get better coordinated. Okay. That's what I had. Any other final questions, comments from the team or anybody else from the FCC or the USDA? I'm not seeing any hands go up. So what I want to do is I want to thank everybody for your engagement today. It's been terrific. I think we've had really good discussions. I know it's a little bit harder to do these types of things when we're virtual, but I think the team made it work. I really want to thank the chairs and the vice chairs for all the work you've done to get us to this point. I think we have some solid foundation to build upon, some great recommendations. I know the first year was really focused on a lot of analysis and again, learning from others, learning from third parties and external constituents. But that was great. I thought the recommendations were right on. Yes, there is a little bit of kind of overlap here and there, but that's expected. I mean, that was the whole idea of this whole thing, and now it's a point of kind of getting more coordinated, getting a little bit finer, get a little more details around some of these recommendations, which I think are great and are positioned as well. Please, as you go back to your working groups, thank them as well for all the work that they've done. I know a lot of the heavy lifting was done there, and truly do appreciate that in getting us to this point. So. With that, Catherine, any last words from you?
No, I look forward to the future coordination with working groups because I think that we've obviously teed up lots of subject matters for each other in that sense. And I think that working together, I think will bring in additional knowledge and I think end up with a good working product by this time next year.
All right. With that, thank you, everyone, and we can conclude this meeting. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Teddy.
Thank you, Ted.